Part 3, Chapter 12 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. The load was complete, and Ivan, jumping down, took his gentle fat horse by the bridle and joined the file of Telyigas going into the village. The young woman threw her rake on top of the load and, swinging her arms, joined the other women who had collected in a group to sing. These women, with rakes on their shoulders and dressed in bright colors, suddenly burst forth into song with loud, happy voices as they followed the carts. One wild, untrained voice would sing a verse of piasna, or folk song, and when she had reached the refrain, 50 other young, fresh, and powerful voices would take it up simultaneously and repeat it to the end. The peasant women, singing their folk song, came toward Levin, and it seemed to him that a cloud, frighted with the thunder of gaiety, was moving down upon him. The thunder cloud drew near, it took possession of him, and the haycock on which he was reclining, and the other haycocks, and the carts, and the whole meadow, and the far-off field, moved and swayed to the rhythm of this wild song, with its accompaniment of whistles and shrill cries and clapping of hands. The wholesome gaiety filled him with envy. He would have liked to take part in this expression of joyous life, but nothing of the sort could he do, and he was obliged to lie still and look and listen. When the throng with their song had passed out of sight and hearing, an oppressive feeling of melancholy came over him at the thought of his loneliness, of his physical indolence, of the hostility which existed between him and this alien world. Some of these very muzhiks, even those who had quarrelled with him about the hay, or those whom he had injured, or those who had intended to cheat him, saluted him gaily as they passed, and evidently did not and could not bear him any malice, or feel any remorse, or even remembrance that they had tried to defraud him. All was swallowed up and forgotten in this sea of joyous universal labour. God gave the day, God gave the strength, and the day and the strength consecrated the labour and yielded their own reward. For whom was the work? What would be the fruits of the work? These were secondary, unimportant considerations. Levin had often looked with interest at this life, had often experienced a feeling of envy of the people that lived this life, but today, for the first time, especially under the impression of what he had seen in the bearing of Ivan Parmenov toward his young wife, he had clearly realized that it depended upon himself whether he would exchange the burdensome, idle, artificial, selfish existence which he led for the laborious, simple, pure and delightful life of the peasantry. The elder who had been sitting with him had already gone home. The people were scattered. The neighbouring villagers had already reached their houses, but those who lived at a distance were preparing to spend the night in the meadow and were getting ready for supper. Levin, without being noticed by the people, still reclined on the haycock, looking, listening, and thinking. The peasantry gathered in the meadow scarcely slept through the short summer night. At first gay gossip and laughter were heard while they were eating. Then followed songs and jests again. No trace of all the long, laborious day was left upon them, except its happiness. Just before the dawn there was silence everywhere. Nothing could be heard but the nocturnal sounds of the frogs ceaselessly croaking in the marsh, and the horses whinnying as they waited in the mist that rose before the dawn. Coming to himself, Levin got up from the haycock and, looking at the stars, saw that the night had gone. "Well, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this?" he asked himself, trying to give a shape to the thoughts and feelings that had occurred to him during this short night. All that he had thought and felt had taken 3 separate directions. First, it seemed to him that he must renounce his former mode of life, which was useful neither to himself nor to anyone else. This renunciation seemed to him very attractive and was easy and simple. The second direction that his thoughts and feelings took referred especially to the new life which he longed to lead. He clearly realized the simplicity, purity, and regularity of this new life, and was convinced that he should find in it that satisfaction, that calmness and mental freedom, which he now felt the lack of so painfully. The third line of thought brought him to the question how he should effect the transition from the old life to the new, and in this regard nothing clear presented itself to his mind. I must have a wife. I must engage in work, and have the absolute necessity of work. Shall I abandon Pokrovskoye? Buy land? Join the commune? Marry a peasant woman? How can I do all this? He again asked himself, and no answer came. However, he went on, in his self-communings, I have not slept all night, and my ideas are not very clear. I shall reduce them to order by and by. One thing is certain, this night has settled my fate. All my former dreams of family existence were rubbish, but all this is vastly simpler and better. How lovely, he thought as he gazed at the delicate white curly clouds, coloured like mother of pearl, which floated in the sky above him. How charming everything has been this lovely night. And when did that shell have time to form? I have been looking this long time at the sky, and yet nothing was to be seen, only 2 white streaks. Yes, thus, without my knowing it, my views about life have been changed. He left the meadow and walked along the highway that led to the village. A cool breeze began to blow, and it became grey and melancholy. The sombre moment was at hand which generally precedes the dawn, the perfect triumph of light over the darkness. Shivering with the chill, Levin walked fast, looking at the ground. What is that? Who is coming? He asked himself, hearing the sound of bells. He raised his head. About 40 paces from him he saw, coming toward him on the highway, on the grassy edge where he himself was walking, a travelling carriage drawn by 4 horses. The post-horses, to avoid the ruts, pressed close against the pole, but the skilful postilion, seated on one side of the box, kept the pole directly over the rut, so that the wheels kept only on the smooth surface of the road. Levin was so interested in this that, without thinking who might be coming, he only glanced heedlessly at the carriage. In one corner of the carriage an elderly lady was asleep, and by the window sat a young girl, evidently only just awake, holding with both hands the ribbons of her white bonnet. Serene and thoughtful, filled with a lofty, complex life which Levin could not understand, she was gazing beyond him at the glow of the morning sky. At the very instant that this vision flashed by him he caught a glimpse of her frank eyes. She recognized him, and a gleam of joy, mingled with wonder, lightened up her face. He could not be mistaken. Only she in all the world had such eyes. In all the world there was only one being who could concentrate for him all the light and meaning of life. It was she. It was Kitty. He judged that she was on her way from the railway station to Yergoshovo. And all the thoughts that had occupied Levin through his sleepless night, all the resolutions that he had made, vanished in a twinkling. Horror seized him as he remembered his dream of marrying a Krestyanka, a peasant wife. In that carriage which flashed by him on the other side of the road and disappeared was the only possible answer to his life's enigma which had tormented and puzzled him so long. She was now out of sight. The rumble of the wheels had ceased, and scarcely could he hear the bells. The barking of the dogs told him that the carriage was passing through the village, and now there remained only the empty fields, the distant village, and himself an alien and a stranger to everything, walking solitary on the deserted highway. He looked at the sky, hoping to find there still the sea-shell cloud which he had admired, and which personified for him the movement of his thoughts and feelings during the night. But in the sky there was nothing that resembled the shell. There, at immeasurable heights, that mysterious change had already taken place. There was no trace of the shell, but in its place there extended over a good half of the heavens a carpet of cirrus clouds sweeping on and sweeping on. The sky was growing blue and luminous, and with the same tenderness and also with the same unsatisfactoriness it answered his questioning look. No, he said to himself, however good this simple and laborious life may be, I cannot bring myself to it. I love her. End of chapter 12. Part 3, Chapter 13 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. No one except Alexey Alexandrovitch's most intimate friends suspected that this apparently cold and sober-minded man had one weakness absolutely contradictory to the general consistency of his character. He could not look with indifference at a child or a woman who was weeping. The sight of tears caused him to lose his self-control, and destroyed for him his reasoning faculties. The manager of his chancellery and his secretary understood this, and warned women who came to present petitions not to allow their feelings to overcome them unless they wanted to injure their prospects. "He will fly into a passion and will not listen to you," they said. And it was a fact that the trouble which the sight of weeping caused Alexey Alexandrovitch was expressed by hasty irritation. I cannot do anything for you. Please leave me," he would exclaim, as a general thing, in such cases. When, on their way back from the races, Anna confessed her relations with Vronsky, and, immediately afterwards covering her face with her hands, burst into tears, Alexey Alexandrovitch, in spite of his anger against his wife, was conscious at the same time of that deep, soul-felt emotion welling up which the sight of tears always caused him. Knowing this, and knowing that any expression of it would be incompatible with the situation, he endeavored to restrain any sign of agitation, and therefore he neither moved nor looked at her. Hence arose that strange appearance of death-like rigidity in his face which so impressed Anna. When they reached home, he helped her from the carriage, and having made a great effort, he left her with ordinary politeness, saying only those words which would not oblige him to follow any course. He simply said that on the morrow he would let her know his decision. His wife's words, confirming his worst suspicions, caused a keen pain in his heart, and this pain was made still keener by the strange sensation of physical pity for her, caused by the sight of her tears. Yet as he sat alone in his carriage, Alexey Alexandrovitch, to his surprise and pleasure, was conscious of an absolute freedom, not only from that sense of pity, but also from the doubts and the pangs of jealousy which had of late been tormenting him. He experienced the feelings of a man who has been suffering for a long time from a toothache. After one terrible moment of agony, and the sensation of something enormous, greater than the head itself, which is wrenched out of the jaw, the patient, hardly able to believe in his good fortune, suddenly discovers that the pain that has been poisoning his life so long has ceased, and that he can live and think and interest himself in something besides his aching tooth. This feeling Alexey Alexandrovitch now experienced. The pain had been strange and terrible, but now it was over. He felt that he could live again and think of something besides his wife. Without honor, without heart, without religion, an abandoned woman. I have always known this, and I have always seen it, though out of pity for her I tried to shut my eyes to it, he said to himself. And it really seemed to him that he had always seen this. He recalled many details of their past lives, and things which had once seemed innocent in his eyes now clearly came up as proofs that she had always been corrupt. I made a mistake when I joined my life to hers, but my mistake was not my fault, and therefore I ought not to be unhappy. I am not the guilty one, said he, but she is. But I have nothing more to do with her. She does not exist for me. All that would befall her as well as his son, toward whom also his feelings underwent a similar change, now ceased to occupy him. The only thing that did occupy him now was the question how to make his escape from this wretched crisis in a manner at once wise, correct, and honorable for himself, and having cleared himself from the mud with which she had spattered him by her fall, how he would henceforth pursue his own path of honorable, active, and useful life. Must I make myself wretched because a wretched woman has committed a crime? All I want is to find the best way out from this situation to which she has brought me, and I will find it," he added, getting more and more indignant. "I am not the first, nor the last." And not speaking of the historical examples beginning with La Belle Helene of Menelaus, which had recently been brought to all their memories by Offenbach's opera. Alexey Alexandrovitch went over in his mind a whole series of contemporary episodes, where husbands of the highest position had been obliged to mourn the faithlessness of their wives. Daryelov, Bolkonsky, Prince Karabanov, Count Paskudin, Dram, yes, even Dram, honorable, industrious man as he is, Semenov, Shagin, Segonin. Admit that they cast unjust ridicule on these men. As for me, I never saw anything except their misfortune, and I always pitied them, said Alexey Alexandrovitch to himself, although this was not so, and he had never sympathized with misfortune of this sort, and had only plumed himself the more as he had heard of wives deceiving their husbands. This is a misfortune which is likely to strike anyone, and now it has struck me. The only thing is to know how to find the best way of settling the difficulty. And he began to recall the different ways in which these men, finding themselves in such a position as he was, had behaved. Daryelov fought a duel. Dueling had been a subject of consideration to Alexey Alexandrovitch when he was a young man, and for the reason that physically he was a timid man, and he knew it. He could not think without a shudder of having a pistol levelled at him, and never in his life had he practised with firearms. This instinctive horror had in early life caused him often to think about dueling, and to imagine himself to expose his life to this danger. Afterward, when he had attained success and a high social position, he had got out of the way of such thoughts, but his habit of mind now reasserted itself, and his timidity, owing to his cowardice, was so great that Alexey Alexandrovitch long deliberated about the matter, turning it over on all sides, and questioning the expediency of a duel, although he knew perfectly well that in any case he would never fight. Undoubtedly the state of our society is still so savage, he said, though it is not so in England, that very many, and in these many, to whom such a solution was satisfactory, there were some for whose opinions Alexey Alexandrovitch had the very highest regard. Looking at the duel from its good side, to what result does it lead? Let us suppose that I send a challenge. And Alexey Alexandrovitch went on to draw a vivid picture of the night that he would spend after the challenge, and he imagined the pistol aimed at him and shuddered, and realized that he could never do such a thing. Let us suppose that I challenge him to a duel. Let us suppose that I learn how to shoot, he forced himself to think. That I am standing, that I pull the trigger, he said to himself, shutting his eyes, and it happens that I kill him. He shook his head, to drive away these absurd notions. What sense would there be in causing a man's death, in order to settle my relations to a sinful woman and her son? Even then I should have to decide what I ought to do with her. But suppose, and this is vastly more likely to happen, that I am the one killed or wounded. I, an innocent man, the victim, killed or wounded, still more absurd. But, moreover, would not the challenge to a duel on my part be a dishonorable action, certain as I am beforehand that my friends would never allow me to fight a duel? Would never permit the life of a government official, who is so indispensable to Russia, to be exposed to danger? What would happen? This would happen, that I, knowing in advance that the matter would never result in any danger, should seem to people to be anxious to win notoriety by a challenge. It would be dishonorable. It would be false. It would be an act of deception to others and to myself. A duel is not to be thought of, and no one expects it of me. My sole aim should be to preserve my reputation, and not to suffer any unnecessary interruption of my activity. The service of the state, always important in the eyes of Alexey Alexandrovitch, now appeared to him of extraordinary importance. Having decided against the duel, Alexey Alexandrovitch began to discuss the question of divorce, a second expedient which had been employed by several of the men whom he had in mind. Calling to mind all the well-known examples of divorce, and there had been many in the very highest circles of society, as he well knew, he could not name a single case where the aim of the divorce had been such as he proposed. The husband in each case had sold or given up the faithless wife, and the guilty party who had no right to a second marriage, had entered into relations, imagined to be sanctioned, with a new husband. Alexey Alexandrovitch saw that, in his case at least, legal divorce, whereby the faithless wife would be repudiated, was impossible. He saw that the complicated conditions of his life precluded the possibility of those coarse proofs which the law demanded for the establishment of a wife's guilt. He saw that the distinguished refinement of his life precluded the public use of such proofs, even if they existed, and that the public use of these proofs would cause him to fall lower in public opinion than the guilty wife. Divorce could only end in a scandalous lawsuit, which would be a godsend to his enemies and to lovers of gossip, and would disgrace him from his high position in society. His principal object, the determination of his position with the least possible confusion, would not be attained by a divorce. Divorce, moreover, broke off all intercourse between wife and husband, and united her to her paramour. Now in Alexey Alexandrovitch's heart, in spite of the scornful indifference which he affected to feel toward his wife, there still remained one very keen sentiment, and that was his unwillingness for her, unhindered, to unite her lot with Vronsky, so that her fault would turn out to her advantage. This possible contingency was so painful to Alexey Alexandrovitch that, merely at the thought of it, he bellowed with mental pain, and he got up from his seat, changed his place in the carriage, and for a long time, darkly scowling, wrapped his woolly plaid about his thin and chilly legs. Besides formal divorce, he said to himself, as, growing a little calmer, he continued his deliberations, it would be possible to act as Karabanoff, Paskudin, and that gentle Dram have done. That is to say, I could separate from my wife. But this measure had almost the same disadvantages as the other. It was practically to throw his wife into Vronsky's arms. No, it is impossible, impossible, he said aloud, again trying to wrap himself up in his plaid. I cannot be unhappy, but neither she nor he ought to be happy. The feeling of jealousy which had tormented him while he was still ignorant had passed away when by his wife's words the aching tooth had been pulled, but this feeling was replaced by a different one, the desire not only that she should not triumph, but that she should receive the reward for her sin. He did not express it, but in the depths of his soul he desired that she should be punished for the way in which she had destroyed his peace and honor. After once more passing in review the conditions of the duel, the divorce, and the separation, and once more rejecting them, Alexey Alexandrovitch came to the conclusion that there was only one way to escape from his trouble, and that was to keep his wife under his protection, shielding his misfortune from the eyes of the world, employing all possible means to break off the illicit relationship, and, above all, though he did not avow it to himself, punishing his wife's fault. I must let her know that, in the cruel situation into which she has brought our family, I have come to the conclusion that the status quo is the only way that seems advisable for both sides, and that I will agree to preserve it under the strenuous condition that she, on her part, fulfill my will, and break off all relations with her paramour. For the bolstering of this resolution when once he had finally adopted it, Alexey Alexandrovitch brought up one convincing argument. Only by acting in this manner do I conform absolutely with the law of religion, said he to himself. Only by this reasoning do I refuse to send away the adulterous woman, and I give her the chance of amending her ways, and likewise, painful as it will be to me, I consecrate a part of my powers to her regeneration and salvation. Though Alexey Alexandrovitch knew that he could have no moral influence over his wife, and that the attempts which he should make to reform his wife would have no other outcome than falsehood, although during the trying moments that he had been living, he had not for an instant thought of finding his guidance in religion, yet now, when he felt that his determination was in accordance with religion, this religious sanction of his resolution gave him full comfort and a certain share of satisfaction. He was consoled with the thought that in such a trying period of his life no one would have the right to say that he had not acted in conformity to the religion whose banner he bore aloft in the midst of coolness and indifference. As he went over in his mind the remotest contingencies, Alexey Alexandrovitch even saw no reason why his relations with his wife should not remain pretty much as they had always been. Of course, it would be impossible for him to feel great confidence in her, but he saw no reason why he should ruin his whole life and suffer personally because she was a bad and faithless wife. "Yes, time will pass," he said to himself, "time which solves all problems, and our relations will be brought into the old order, so that I shall not feel the disorder that has broken up the current of my life. She must be unhappy, but I am not to blame, and so I do not see why I must be unhappy too." Chapter 13. Part 3, Chapter 14 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Alexey Alexandrovitch, during his drive back to Petersburg, not only fully decided on the line of conduct which he should adopt, but even composed in his head a letter to be sent to his wife. When he reached his Switzer's room, he glanced at the official papers and letters which had been brought from the ministry and ordered them to be brought into the library. "Shut the door and let no one in," he said in reply to a question of the Swiss, emphasizing the last words, "Ni prinamment," let no one in, with some satisfaction, which was an evident sign that he was in a better state of mind. Alexey Alexandrovitch walked up and down the library once or twice, and then, coming to his huge writing table, on which his lackey, before going out, had placed 6 lighted candles, he cracked his fingers and sat down, and began to examine his writing materials. Then, leaning his elbow on the table, he bent his head to one side, and after a moment of reflection, he began to write without the slightest hesitancy. He wrote in French without addressing her by name, employing the pronoun vous, which has less coldness than the corresponding Russian word vieux has. He wrote, "At our recent interview I expressed the intention of communicating to you my resolution concerning the subject of our conversation. Having carefully taken everything into consideration, I am writing now with the view of fulfilling my promise. This is my decision. Whatever your conduct may have been, I do not acknowledge that you have the right to break the bonds which a power supreme has consecrated. The family cannot be broken up through a caprice, an arbitrary act, even through the crime of one of the parties, and our lives must remain unchanged. This must be so for my sake, for your sake, for the sake of our son. I am fully persuaded that you have been repentant, that you still feel repentant for the deed that obliges me to write to you, that you will cooperate with me in destroying root and branch the cause of our estrangement and in forgetting the past. In case this be not so, you yourself must understand what awaits you and your son. In regard to all this I hope to have a more specific conversation at a personal interview. As the summer season is nearly over, I beg of you to come back to Petersburg as soon as possible, and certainly not later than Tuesday. All the necessary measures for your return hither will be taken. I beg you to take notice that I attach a very peculiar importance to your attention to my request. A. Karenin. P.S. I enclose in this letter money, which you may need at this particular time." He reread his letter, and was satisfied with it, especially with the fact that he had thought of sending the money. There was not an angry word, not a reproach, neither was there any condescension in it. The essential thing was the golden bridge for their reconciliation. He folded his letter, smoothed it with a huge paper cutter of massive ivory, enclosed it in an envelope together with the money, and rang the bell, feeling that sense of satisfaction which the use of his well-ordered, perfect epistolary arrangements always gave him. "Give this letter to the courier for delivery to Anna Arkadyevna at the dacha to-morrow," he said, and arose. "I will obey your Excellency. Will you have tea here in the library?" Alexey Alexandrovitch ordered tea brought to him in the library, and then, still playing with the paper cutter, he went toward his armchair, near which were a shaded lamp and a French work on cuneiform inscriptions which he had begun. Above the chair, in an oval gilt frame, hung a portrait of Anna, the excellent work of a distinguished painter. Alexey Alexandrovitch looked at it. The eyes, as inscrutable as they had been on the evening of their attempted explanation, looked down at him ironically and insolently. Everything about this remarkable portrait seemed to Alexey Alexandrovitch insupportably insolent and provoking, from the black lace on her head and her dark hair, to the white, beautiful hand and the ring finger covered with jeweled rings. After gazing at this portrait for a moment, Alexey Alexandrovitch shuddered, his lips trembled, and with a "brr" he turned away. Hastily sitting down in his armchair, he opened his book. He tried to read, but he could not regain the keen interest which he had felt before in the cuneiform inscriptions. His eyes looked at the book, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He was thinking, not of his wife, but of a complication which had recently arisen in important matters connected with his official activity, and which at present formed the chief interest of his service. He felt that he was more deeply than ever plunged into this complicated affair, and that he could without self-conceit claim that the idea which had originated in his brain was bound to disentangle the whole difficulty, to confirm him in his official career, to put down his enemies, and thus enable him to do a signal service to the state. As soon as his servant had brought him the tea and left the room, Alexey Alexandrovitch got up and went to his writing table. Pushing to the center of it a portfolio which contained papers relating to this affair, he seized a pencil from the stand, and, with a faintly sarcastic smile of self-satisfaction, buried himself in the perusal of the documents relative to the complicated business under consideration. The complication was as follows. The distinguishing trait of Alexey Alexandrovitch as a government official, the one characteristic trait peculiar to him alone, though it must mark every progressive chinovnik, the trait which had contributed to his success no less than his eager ambition, his moderation, his uprightness, and his self-confidence, was his detestation of red tape, and his sincere desire to avoid, as far as he could, unnecessary writing, and to go straight on in accomplishing needful business with all expedition and economy. It happened that, in the famous commission of the 14th of June, a project was mooted for the irrigation of the fields in the government of Zarai, which formed a part of Alexey Alexandrovitch's jurisdiction, and this project offered a striking example of the few results obtained by official correspondence and expenditure. Alexey Alexandrovitch knew that it was a worthy object. The matter of the irrigation of the fields in the government of Zarai had come to him by inheritance from his predecessor in the ministry, and, in fact, had already cost much money and brought no results. When Alexey Alexandrovitch entered the ministry, he had perceived this and had wanted immediately to put his hand to this work, but at first he did not feel himself strong enough and perceived that it touched too many interests and was imprudent, and afterward, having become involved in other matters, he entirely forgot about it. The fertilization of the Zarai fields, like all things, went in its own way by force of inertia. Many people got their living through it, and one family in particular, a very agreeable and musical family, all of the daughters of which played on stringed instruments. Alexey Alexandrovitch knew this family, and had been nuptial godfather when one of the elder daughters was married. The opposition to this affair, raised by his enemies in another branch of the ministry, was unjust, in the opinion of Alexey Alexandrovitch, because in every ministry there are similar cases which by a well-known rule of official etiquette no one ever bothers himself about. But now, since they had thrown down the gauntlet, he had boldly accepted the challenge and asked for the appointment of a special commission for examining and verifying the labors of the commissioners on the fertilization of the Zarai fields. And this did not prevent him from also keeping these gentlemen busy in other ways. He had also demanded a special commission for investigating the status and organization of the foreign populations. This last question had likewise been raised by the commission of June 14th, and was energetically supported by Alexey Alexandrovitch, on the ground that no delay should be allowed in relieving the deplorable situation of these alien tribes. In committee this matter gave rise to the most lively discussions among the ministries. The ministry hostile to Alexey Alexandrovitch proved that the position of the foreign populations was perfectly flourishing, that to meddle with them would be to injure their well-being, and that, if any fault could be found in regard to the matter, it was due to the neglect of Alexey Alexandrovitch and his ministry in not carrying out the measures prescribed by law. Now Alexey Alexandrovitch had made up his mind to demand, first, the appointment of a new committee, whose duty should be to study on the spot the condition of the foreign populations. Secondly, in case their condition should be found such as the official data in the hands of the committee represented, that a new scientific commission should be sent to study into the causes of this sad state of things, with the aim of settling it from the A. Political, B. Administrative, C. Economical, D. Ethnographical, E. Physical, and F. Religious point of view. Thirdly, that the hostile ministry should be required to furnish the particulars in regard to the measures taken during the last 10 years to relieve the wretched situation in which these tribes were placed. And fourthly and finally, that this ministry should explain the fact that they had acted in absolute contradiction to the fundamental and organic law, volume T, page 18, with reference to Article 36, as was proved by an act of the committee under numbers 17015 and 18308 of the 17th of December, 1863, and the 19th of June, 1864. A flush of animation covered Alexey Alexandrovitch's face as he rapidly wrote down for his own use a digest of these thoughts. After he had covered a sheet of paper, he rang a bell, and sent a messenger to the director of the chancellery, asking for a few data which were missing. Then he got up, and began to walk up and down the room, looking again at the portrait with a frown and a scornful smile. Then he resumed his book about the cuneiform inscriptions, and found that his interest of the evening before had come back to him. He went to bed about 11 o'clock, and as he lay, still awake, he passed in review the affair with his wife, and it no longer appeared to him in the same gloomy aspect. End of chapter 14. Part 3, Chapter 15 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Marianne Spiegel. Though Anna had obstinately and angrily contradicted Vronsky when he told her that her position was impossible, yet in the bottom of her heart she felt that it was false and dishonorable, and she longed with all her soul to escape from it. When, in a moment of agitation, she avowed all to her husband as they were returning from the races, notwithstanding the pain which it cost her, she felt glad. After Alexey Alexandrovitch left her, she kept repeating to herself that she was glad, and now all was explained, and that henceforth there would be at least no more need of falsehood and deception. It seemed to her indubitable that now her possession would be henceforth determined. It might be bad, but it would be definite, and there would be an end to lying and equivocation. The pain which her words had cost her husband and herself would have its compensation, she thought, in the fact that now all would be definite. That very evening Vronsky came to see her, but she did not tell him what had taken place between her husband and herself, although it was needful to tell him in order that the affair might be definitely settled. The next morning, when she awoke, her first memory was of the words that she had spoken to her husband, and they seemed to her so odious that she could not imagine now how she could have brought herself to say such strange brutal words, and she could not conceive what the result of them would be. But the words were irrevocable, and Alexey Alexandrovitch had departed without replying. I have seen Vronsky since, and I did not tell him. Even at the moment he went away, I wanted to hold him back and tell him, but I postponed it because I felt how strange it was that I did not tell him at the first moment. Why did I have the desire, and yet not speak? And, in reply to this question, the hot flush of shame kindled in her face. She realized that it was shame that kept her from speaking. Her position, which the evening before had seemed to her so clear, suddenly presented itself as very far from clear, as inextricable. She began to fear the dishonor about which she had not thought before. When she considered what her husband might do to her, the most terrible ideas came to her mind. It occurred to her that at any instant the steward might appear to drive her out of house and home, and that her shame might be proclaimed to all the world. She asked herself where she could go if they drove her from home, and she found no answer. When she thought of Vronsky, she imagined that he did not love her, and that he was already beginning to tire of her, and that she could not impose herself on him, and she felt angry with him. It seemed to her that the words which she spoke to her husband, and which she incessantly repeated to herself, were spoken so that everybody could hear them, and had heard them. She could not bring herself to look into the faces of those with whom she lived. She could not bring herself to ring for her maid, and still less to go down and meet her son and his governess. The maid came, and stood long at the door, listening. Finally she decided to go to her without a summons. Anna looked at her questioningly, and in her terror she blushed. The maid apologized for coming, saying that she thought she heard the bell. She brought a gown and a note. The note was from Betsy. Betsy reminded her that Lisa Merkolava and the Baroness Stolz, with their adorers, Kaluzhki and the old man Stremov, were coming to her house that morning for a game of croquet. "Come and look on, please, as a study of manners. I shall expect you," was the conclusion of the note. Anna read the letter and sighed profoundly. "Nothing, nothing. I need nothing," she said to Anushka, who was arranging the brushes and toilet articles on her dressing table. "Go away. I will dress myself immediately and come down. I need nothing." Anushka went out, yet Anna did not begin to dress, but sat in the same attitude, with bent head and folded hands, and occasionally she would shiver and begin to make some gesture, to say something, and then fall back into listlessness again. She kept saying, "Bose-moi, bose-moi," but the words had no meaning in her mind. The thought of seeking a refuge from her situation in religion, although she never doubted the faith in which she had been trained, seemed to her as strange as to go and ask help of Alexey Alexandrovitch himself. She knew beforehand that the refuge offered by religion was possible only by the absolute renunciation of all that constituted for her the meaning of life. She suffered, and was frightened besides, by a sensation that was new to her experience hitherto, and which seemed to take possession of her inmost soul. She seemed to feel double, just as sometimes eyes, when weary, see double. She knew not what she feared, what she desired. She knew not whether she feared and desired what had passed, or what was to come, and what she desired she did not know. "Oh, what am I doing?" she cried, suddenly feeling a pain in both temples, and she discovered that she had taken her hair into her two hands and was pulling it. She got up and began to walk the floor. "The coffee is served, and Mamselle and Seroza are waiting," said Anushka, coming in again and finding her mistress in the same condition as before. "Seroza? What is Seroza doing?" suddenly asked Anna, remembering for the first time that morning the existence of her son. "He has been naughty, I think," said Anushka with a smile. "How naughty?" "You had some peaches in the corner cupboard. He took one and ate it on the sly, it seems." The thought of her son suddenly called Anna from the impassive state in which she had been sunk. She remembered the partly sincere, though somewhat exaggerated, rôle of devoted mother, which she had taken on herself for a number of years, and she felt with joy that in this relationship she had a standpoint independent of her relation to her husband and Vronsky. This standpoint was her son. In whatever situation she might be placed, she could not give him up. Her husband might drive her from him and put her to shame. Vronsky might turn his back on her and resume his former independent life, and here again she thought of him with a feeling of anger and reproach. But she could not leave her son. She had an aim in life, and she must act so as to safeguard this relation toward her son, so that they could not take him from her. She must act as speedily as possible before they took him from her. She must take her son and go off. That was the one thing which she now had to do. She must calm herself and get away from this tormenting situation. The very thought of an action having reference to her son, and of going away with him anywhere, already gave her consolation. She dressed in haste, went downstairs, and with firm steps entered the drawing room, where, as usual, she found lunch ready, and Serosa and the governess waiting for her. Serosa, all in white, was standing near a table under the mirror, with the expression of concentrated attention which she knew so well, and in which he resembled his father. Bending over, he was busy with some flowers which he had brought in. The governess had a very stern expression. Serosa, as soon as he saw his mother, uttered a sharp cry, which was a frequent custom of his. "Ah, mamma!" Then he stopped, undecided whether to throw down the flowers and run to his mother, and let the flowers go, or to finish his bouquet and take it to her. The governess bowed, and began a long and circumstantial account of the naughtiness that Serosa had committed, but Anna did not hear her. She was thinking whether she should take her with them. "No, I will not," she decided. "I will go alone with my son." "Yes, that was very naughty," said Anna, and taking the boy by the shoulder, she looked with a gentle, not angry, face at the confused but happy boy, and kissed him. "Leave him with me," she said to the wondering governess, and not letting go his arm, she sat down at the table where the coffee was waiting. "Mamma, I didn't," stammered Serosa, trying to judge by his mother's expression what fate was in store for him for having pilfered the peach. "Serosa," she said, as soon as the governess had left the room, "that was naughty. You will not do it again, will you? Do you love me?" She felt that the tears were standing in her eyes. "Why can I not love him?" she asked herself, studying the boy's frightened and yet happy face. "And can he join with his father to punish me? Will he not have pity on me?" The tears began to course down her face, and, in order to hide them, she rose up quickly, and hastened, almost ran, to the terrace. Clear, cool weather had succeeded the stormy rains of the last few days. In spite of the warm sun which shone on the thick foliage of the trees, it was cool in the shade. She shivered both from the coolness and from the sentiment of fear which in the cool air seized her with new force. "Go and find Marietta," she said to Serosa, who had followed her, and then she began to walk up and down on the straw carpet which covered the terrace. "Will they not forgive me?" she asked herself. "Will they not understand that all this could not possibly have been otherwise?" As she stopped and looked at the top of the aspens waving in the wind, with their freshly washed leaves glittering brightly in the cool sunbeams, it seemed to her that they would not forgive her, that everything would be as pitiless toward her as that sky and that foliage. And again she felt that mysterious sense in her inmost soul that she was in a dual state. "I must not think," she said to herself. "I must have courage. Where shall I go? When? Whom shall I take? Yes, to Moscow by the evening train, with Anushka and Serosa, and only the most necessary things. But first I must write to them both." She hurried back into the house to her boudoir, sat down at the table, and wrote to her husband. "After what has passed, I can no longer remain in your house. I am going away, and I shall take my son. I do not know the laws, and so I do not know with which of his parents the child should remain, but I take him with me because I cannot live without him. Be magnanimous, let me have him." Up to this point she wrote rapidly and naturally, but this appeal to a magnanimity which she had never seen in him, and the need of ending her letter with something affecting, brought her to a halt. "I cannot speak of my fault and my repentance, because—" and again she stopped, unable to find the right words to express her thoughts. "No," she said, "nothing more is necessary," and tearing up this letter she began another, from which she left out any appeal to his generosity, and sealed it. She had to write a second letter to Vronsky. "I have confessed to my husband," she began, and she sat long wrapped in thought, without being able to write more. That was so coarse, so unfeminine. "And then, what can I write to him?" she asked herself. Again the crimson of shame mantled her face as she remembered how calm he was, and she felt so vexed with him that she tore the sheet of paper with its one phrase into bits. "I cannot write," she said to herself, and closing her desk she went upstairs, told the governess and the domestics that she was going to Moscow that evening, and instantly began to make her preparations. Chapter 16. Part 3, Chapter 16 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. In all the rooms of the villa, the men-servants, the gardeners, the lackeys, were hurrying about laden with various things. Cupboards and commodes were cleared of their contents. Twice they had gone to the shop for packing cord. On the floor lay piles of newspapers. 2 trunks, travelling bags, and a bundle of plaids had been carried into the anteroom. A carriage and 2 cabs were waiting at the front door. Anna, who in the haste of packing had somewhat forgotten her inward anguish, was standing by her table in her boudoir and packing her bag, when Annushka called her attention to the rumble of a carriage approaching the house. Anna looked out of the window and saw on the steps Alexey Alexandrovitch's messenger boy ringing the front bell. "Go and see what it is," said she, and then sat down in her chair and, folding her hands on her knees, waited with calm resignation. A lackey brought her a fat packet directed in Alexey Alexandrovitch's handwriting. "The messenger was ordered to wait and answer," said he. "Very well," she replied, and as soon as he left the room she opened the packet with trembling fingers. A roll of fresh, new banknotes in a wrapper fell out first. She unfolded the letter and began to read it at the end. "All the necessary measures for your return hither will be taken. I attach my very particular importance to your attention to my request," she read. She ran it through hastily backwards a second time, read it all through, and then she read it again from beginning to end. When she had finished it, she felt chilled, and had the consciousness that some terrible and unexpected misfortune was crushing her. That very morning she had regretted her confession to her husband, and desired nothing so much as that she had not spoken those words, and this letter treated her words as if they had not been spoken, gave her what she desired, and yet it seemed to her more cruel than anything that she could have imagined. "Right, he is right," she murmured. "Of course, he is always right. He is a Christian. He is magnanimous. Yes, the low, vile man. No one understands. No one knows him but me, and I cannot explain it. People say, he is a religious, moral, honorable, intellectual man, but they have not seen what I have seen. They do not know how for 8 years he has crushed my life, crushed everything that was vital in me, how he has never once thought of me as a living woman who needed love. They do not know how at every step he has insulted me, and yet remained self-satisfied. Have I not striven with all my powers to find a justification of my life? Have I not done my best to love him, to love his son when I could not love my husband? But the time came when I found I could no longer deceive myself, that I am a living being, that I am not to blame, that God has made me so, and that I must love and live. And now what? He might kill me. He might kill him, and I could endure it. I could forgive it. But no, why should I have not foreseen what he would do? He does exactly in accordance with his despicable character. He stands on his rights. But I, poor unfortunate, am sunk lower and more irreclaimably than ever toward ruin. You may surmise what awaits you and your son," she repeated to herself, remembering a sentence in his letter. "It is a threat that he means to rob me of my son, and doubtless their wretched laws allow it. But do I not see why he said that? He has no belief in my love for my son, or else he is deriding, as he always does, in his sarcastic manner, is deriding this feeling of mine, for he knows that I will not abandon my son. I cannot abandon him, that without my son life would be insupportable, even with him whom I love, and that to abandon my son, and leave him, I should fall like the worst of women. This he knows, and knows that I should never have the power to do so. Our lives must remain unchanged," she continued, remembering another sentence in the letter. "This life was a torture before, but of late it has grown worse than ever. What will it be now? And he knows all this, knows that I cannot repent because I breathe, because I love. He knows that nothing except falsehood and deceit can result from this, but he must needs prolong my torture. I know him, and I know that he swims in perjury like a fish in water. But no, I will not give him this pleasure. I will break this network of lies in which he wants to enwrap me. Come what may, anything is better than lies and deception. But how? Pose-moi. Was there ever a woman so unhappy as I? No, I will break it. I will break it, she cried, springing to her feet and striving to keep back the tears. And she went to her writing table to begin another letter to him. But in the lowest depths of her soul she felt that she had not the power to break the network of circumstances, that she had not the power to escape from the situation in which she was placed, false and dishonorable though it was. She sat down at the table, but instead of writing, she folded her arms on the table, and bowed her head on them, and began to weep like a child, with heaving breast and convulsive sobs. She wept because her visions about an explanation, about a settlement of her position, had vanished for ever. She knew that now all things would go on as before, and even worse than before. She felt that her position in society, which she had slighted, and even that morning counted as dross, was dear to her, that she should never have the strength to abandon it for the shameful position of a woman who has deserted her husband and son and joined her lover. She felt that in spite of all her efforts, she could never be stronger than herself. She never would know what freedom to love meant, but would be always a guilty woman, constantly under the threat of detection, deceiving her husband for the disgraceful society of an independent stranger, with whose life she could never join hers. She knew that this would be so, and yet at the same time it was so terrible that she could not acknowledge, even to herself, how it would end. And she wept, unrestrainedly as a child who has been punished sobs. The steps of a lackey approaching brought her to herself, and hiding from him her face, she pretended to be writing. "The courier would like his answer," said the lackey. "His answer? Oh, yes," said Anna. "Let him wait. I will ring." "What can I write?" she asked herself. "How decide by myself alone? What do I know? What do I want? Whom do I love?" Again it seemed to her that in her soul she felt the dual nature. She was alarmed at this feeling, and seized on the first pretext for activity that presented itself, so that she might be freed from thoughts about herself. "I must see Alexey." Thus in thought she called Vronsky. "He alone can tell me what I must do. I will go to Betsy's. Perhaps I shall find him there." She completely forgot that on the evening before, when she told him that she was not going to the Princess Tverskaya's, he said that in that case he should not go there either. She went to the table again, and wrote her husband. "I have received your letter. A." She rang and gave it to the lackey. "We are not going," she said to Anushka, who was just coming in. "Not going at all?" "No, but don't unpack before tomorrow, and have the carriage wait. I am going to the princess's." "What gown shall you wear?" Chapter 16. Part 3, Chapter 17 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. The croquet party to which the Princess Tverskaya invited Anna was to consist of 2 ladies and their adorers. These 2 ladies were the leading representatives of a new and exclusive Petersburg clique called, in imitation of an imitation, les 7 merveilles du monde, the 7 wonders of the world. Both of them belonged to the highest society, but to a circle absolutely hostile to that in which Anna moved. Moreover, old Stremov, one of the influential men of the city, and Liza Merkalov's lover, was in the service of Alexey Alexandrovitch's enemies. From all these considerations Anna did not care to go to Betsy's, and her refusal called forth the hints in the Princess Tverskaya's note. But now she decided to go, hoping to find Vronsky there. She reached the Princess Tverskaya's before the other guests. Just as she arrived, Vronsky's lackey, with his well-combed side whiskers, like a kammerjunker, was at the door. Raising his cap, he stepped inside to let her pass. Anna recognized him, and only then remembered that Vronsky had told her that he was not coming. Undoubtedly he had sent him with his excuses. As she was taking off her wraps in the anteroom, she heard the lackey, who rolled his R's like a kammerjunker, say, "From the Count to the Princess." At the same time he delivered his note. She wanted to ask him where his baron was. She wanted to go back and write him a note asking him to come to her, or to go and find him herself. But she could not follow out any of these plans, for the bell had already announced her presence, and one of the princess's lackeys was waiting at the door to usher her into the rooms beyond. "The princess is in the garden. Word has been sent to her. Would you not like to step into the garden?" said a second lackey in the second room. Her position of uncertainty, of darkness, was just the same as at home. It was even worse, because she could not make any decision. She could not see Vronsky, and she was obliged to remain in the midst of a company of strangers diametrically opposed to her present mood. She wore a toilet which she knew was very becoming. She was not alone. She was surrounded by that solemn atmosphere of indolence so familiar. And on the whole it was better to be there than at home. She was not obliged to think what she would do. Things would arrange themselves. Betsy came to meet her in a white toilet absolutely stunning in its elegance, and Anna greeted her, as usual, with a smile. The Princess Tverskaya was accompanied by Tushkevitch, and a young relative who, to the great delight of the provincial family to which she belonged, was spending the summer with the famous princess. Apparently there was something unnatural in Anna's appearance, for Betsy immediately remarked it. "I did not sleep well," replied Anna, looking furtively at the lackey, who was coming, as she supposed, to bring Vronsky's note to the princess. "How glad I am that you came," said Betsy. "I am just up, and should like to have a cup of tea before the others come. And you," she said, addressing Tushkevitch, "had better go with Maska and try the croquet ground, which has just been clipped. You and I will have time for a little confidential talk while taking our tea. We'll have a cozy chat, won't we?" she added, in English, addressing Anna with a smile, and taking her hand, in which she held a sunshade. "All the more willingly because I cannot stay long. I must call on old Verdi. I have been promising for 100 years to come and see her," said Anna, to whom the lie, though contrary to her nature, seemed not only simple and easy, but even pleasurable. Why she said a thing which she forgot the second after, she herself could not have told. She said it at haphazard, so that, in case Vronsky were not coming, she might have a way of escape, and try to find him elsewhere. And why she happened to select the name of old Frailina Vrede rather than any other of her acquaintances was likewise inexplicable. But, as events proved, out of all possible schemes for meeting Vronsky, she could not have chosen better. "No, I shall not let you go," replied Betsy, scrutinizing Anna's face. "Indeed, if I were not so fond of you, I should be tempted to be vexed with you. Anybody would think that you are afraid of my company compromising you. Tea in the little parlor, if you please," she said to the lackey, blinking her eyes as was habitual with her, and taking the letter from him, she began to read it. "Alexey disappoints us," she said in French. "He writes that he cannot come," she added, in a tone as simple and unaffected as if it had never entered her mind that Vronsky was of any more interest to Anna than as a possible partner in a game of croquet. Anna knew that Betsy knew all, but, as she heard Betsy speak of Vronsky now, she almost brought herself to believe for a moment that she knew nothing. "Ah," she said indifferently, as if it was a detail which did not interest her. "How," she continued, still smiling, "could your society compromise anyone?" This manner of playing with words, this hiding a secret, had a great charm for Anna, as it had for all women, and it was not the necessity of secrecy, or the reason for secrecy, but the process itself, that gave the pleasure. "I cannot be more Catholic than the Pope," she said. "Stremoff and Lisa Merkaloff, they are the cream of the cream of society. They are received everywhere. But she laid special stress on the I have never been severe and intolerant. I simply have not had time." "No, but perhaps you prefer not to meet Stremoff? Let him break lances with Alexey Alexandrovitch in committee hearings, that does not concern us. But in society he is a lovely man as I know, and a passionate lover of croquet. But you shall see him. And you must see how admirably he conducts himself in his ridiculous position as Liza's aged lover. He is very charming. Don't you know Sappho Stolz? She is the latest, absolutely the latest style." While Betsy was saying all this, Anna perceived, by her joyous, intelligent eyes, that she saw her embarrassment and was trying to put her at her ease. They had gone into the little boudoir. "By the way, I must write a word to Alexey." And Betsy sat down at her writing table, hastily penned a few lines, and enclosed them in an envelope. "I wrote him to come to dinner. One of the ladies who is going to be here has no gentleman. See if I am imperative enough. Excuse me if I leave you a moment. Please seal it and direct it," she said, at the door. "I have some arrangements to make." Without a moment's hesitation Anna took Betsy's seat at the table, and, without reading her note, added these words: "I must see you without fail. Come to the Brady's garden. I will be there at 6:00. She sealed the letter, and Betsy, coming in a moment later, dispatched it at once. The two ladies took their tea at the little table in the cool boudoir, and had indeed a very cosy chat, as the princess had promised, until the arrival of her guests. They expressed their judgments on them, beginning with Lisa Merkaloff. "She is very charming, and she has always been congenial to me," said Anna. "You ought to like her. She adores you. Yesterday evening, after the races, she came to see me, and was in despair not to find you. She says you are a genuine heroine of a romance, and that if she were a man she would commit 1,000 follies for your sake. Stremoff told her she did that, even as she was." "But please, tell me one thing I could never understand," said Anna, after a moment of silence, and in a tone which clearly showed that she did not ask an idle question, but that what she wanted explained was more important to her than would appear. "Please tell me, what are the relations between her and Prince Kalusky, the man they call Mishka? I've rarely seen them together. What are their relations?" A smile came into Betsy's eyes, and she looked keenly at Anna. "It's a new kind," she replied. "All the ladies have adopted it. They've thrown their caps behind the mill. But there are ways, and ways, of throwing them." "Yes, but what are her relations with Kalusky?" Betsy, to Anna's surprise, broke into a gale of irresistible laughter, which was an unusual thing with her. "But you are trespassing on the Princess Myakaya's province. It is the question of an enfant terrible," said Betsy, trying in vain to restrain her gaiety, but again breaking out into that contagious laughter which is the peculiarity of people who rarely laugh. "But you must ask them," she at length managed to say, with the tears running down her cheeks. "Well, you laugh," said Anna, in spite of herself joining in her friend's amusement, "but I never could understand it at all, and I don't understand what part the husband plays." "The husband? Lisa Merkaloff's husband carries her plaid for her, and is always at her beck and call. But the real meaning of the affair no one cares to know. You know that in good society people don't speak, and don't even think of certain details of the toilet. Well, it is the same here." "Are you going to Rolandaki's fête?" asked Anna, to change the conversation. "I don't think so," replied Betsy, and not looking at her companion, she carefully poured the fragrant tea into their little transparent cups. Then, having handed one to Anna, she rolled a cigarette, and, putting it into a silver holder, she began to smoke. You see, I am in a fortunate position," she began seriously, holding her cup in her hand. "I understand you, and I understand Liza. Liza is one of these naïve, childlike natures, who cannot distinguish between ill and good. At least, she was so when she was young, and now she knows that this simplicity is becoming to her. Now perhaps she purposely fails to understand the distinction," said Betsy with a sly smile. "But all the same it becomes her. You see, it is quite possible to look on things from a tragic standpoint, and to get torment out of them. And it is quite possible to look on it simply, and even gaily. Possibly you are inclined to look on things too tragically." "How I should like to know others as well as I know myself," said Anna with a serious and pensive look. "Am I worse than others, or better? Worse, I think." "You are an enfant terrible, was Betsy's comment. "But here they are." Chapter 17. Part 3, Chapter 18 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Steps were heard, and a man's voice, then a woman's voice and laughter, and immediately after the expected guests came in. Sappho Stolz and a young man called Vaska, whose face shone with exuberant health. It was evident that rich blood-making beef, Burgundy and truffles had accomplished their work. Vaska bowed to the two ladies and glanced at them, but only for a second. He followed Sappho into the drawing-room, and he followed her through the drawing-room as if he had been tied to her, and he kept his brilliant eyes fastened on her as if he wished to devour her. Sappho Stolz was a blonde with black eyes. She wore shoes with enormously high heels, and she came in with slow, vigorous steps, and shook hands with the ladies energetically, like a man. Anna had never before met with this new celebrity, and was struck, not only by her beauty, but by the extravagance of her toilet, and the boldness of her manners. On her head was a veritable scaffolding of false and natural hair of a lovely golden hue, and of a height corresponding to the mighty proportions of her protuberant and very visible bosom. Her dress was so tightly pulled back that at every movement it outlined the shape of her knees and thighs, and involuntarily the question arose, where, under this enormous, tottering mountain, did her neat little body, so exposed above and so tightly laced below, really end? Betsy made haste to introduce her to Anna. "Can you imagine it? We almost ran over 2 soldiers," she instantly began to relate, winking, smiling, and kicking back her train, which she in turn threw too far over to the other side. "I was coming with Vaska. Oh, yes, you are not acquainted." And she introduced the young man by his family name, laughing heartily at her mistake in calling him Vaska before strangers. Vaska bowed a second time to Anna, but said nothing to her. He turned to Sappho. "The wager is lost. We came first," said he, smiling. "You must pay." Sappho laughed still more gaily. "Not now, though," she said. "All right. I'll take it by and by." "Very well, very well. Oh, by the way," she suddenly cried out to the hostess, "I forgot. Stupid that I was. I bring you a guest. He is here." The young guest whom Sappho presented, after having forgotten him, was a guest of such importance that, notwithstanding his youth, all the ladies rose to receive him. This was Sappho's new adorer, and, just as Vaska did, he followed her every step. Immediately after came Prince Kalusky and Liza Merkaloff, with Stremov. Liza was a rather thin brunette, with an oriental, indolent type of countenance, and with ravishing, and as everybody said, inscrutable eyes. The style of her dark dress was absolutely in keeping with her beauty. Anna noticed it, and approved. Liza was as quiet and unpretentious as Sappho was loud and obstreperous. But Liza, for Anna's taste, was vastly more attractive. Betsy, in speaking of her to Anna, had ridiculed her affectation of the manner of an innocent child, but when Anna saw her, she felt that this was not fair. Liza was really an innocent, gentle, and irresponsible woman, a little spoiled. To be sure, her morals were the same as Sappho's. She also had in her train, as if sewed to her, 2 adorers, one young, the other old, who devoured her with their eyes. But there was something about her better than her surroundings. She was like a diamond of the purest water surrounded by glass. The brilliancy shone out of her lovely, enigmatical eyes. The wearied and yet passionate look of her eyes, surrounded by dark circles, struck one by its absolute sincerity. Anyone looking into their depths would think that he knew her completely, and to know her was to love her. At the sight of Anna her whole face suddenly lighted up with a happy smile. "Oh, how glad I am to see you," she said, as she went up to her. "Yesterday afternoon at the races I wanted to get to you, but you had just gone. I was so anxious to see you yesterday especially. Too bad, wasn't it?" she said, gazing at Anna with a look which seemed to disclose her whole soul. "Yes, I would never have believed that anything could be so exciting," replied Anna, with the same color. The company now began to get ready to go to the lawn. "I'm not going," said Liza, sitting down near Anna. "You're not going, are you? What pleasure can anyone find in croquet?" "But I am very fond of it," said Anna. "There, how is it that you don't get ennui? To look at you is a joy. You live, but I vegetate." "How vegetate? Why, they say that you have the gayest society in Petersburg," said Anna. "Perhaps those who are not of our circle are still more ennui. But we, it seems to me, are not happy, but bored, terribly bored." Sappho lighted a cigarette and went to the lawn with the two young men. Betsy and Stremov stayed at the tea table. "How bored?" asked Betsy. "Sappho says she had a delightful evening with you yesterday." "Oh, how unendurable it was," said Liza. "They all came to my house with me after the races, and it was all so utterly monotonous. It is for ever one and the same thing. They sat on the divans the whole evening. How could that be delightful? No, but what do you do to keep from being bored?" she asked again of Anna. "It is enough to look at you. You are evidently a woman who can be happy or unhappy, but never ennui. Now, explain what you do." "I don't do anything," said Anna, confused by such a stream of questions. "That is the best way," said Stremov, joining the conversation. Stremov was a man of 50 years old, rather gray but well preserved, very ugly but with a face full of character and intelligence. Lisa Merkalov was his wife's niece, and he spent with her all his leisure time. Though he was an employee in the service of Alexey Alexandrovitch's political enemies, he endeavored, now that he met Anna in society, to act the man of the world and be exceedingly amiable to his enemy's wife. "The very best way is to do nothing," he continued with his wise smile. "I have been telling you this long time," turning to Lisa Merkalov, "that if you don't want to be bored, you must not think it is possible to be bored, just as one must not be afraid of sleeping if he is troubled with insomnia. This is just what Anna Arkadyevna told you." "I should be very glad if I had said so," said Anna, "because it is not only clever, it is true." "But will you tell me why it is not hard to go to sleep, and not hard to be free from ennui?" "To sleep you must work, and to be happy you must also work." "But how can I work when my labor is useful to no one? But to make believe, I neither can nor will." "You are incorrigible," said he, looking at her but turning to Anna again. He rarely met her and could not speak well to her except in the way of small talk, but he understood how to say light things gracefully, and he asked her when she was going back to Petersburg, and whether she liked the Countess Lidia Ivanovna. And he asked her these questions in a manner which showed his desire to be her friend and to express his consideration and respect. Tushkevitch came in just then and explained that the whole company was waiting for the croquet players. "No, don't go, I beg of you," said Liza, when she found that Anna was not intending to stay. Stremov added his persuasions. "It is too great a contrast," said he, "between our society and old Vrede's. And then, you will be for her only an object of slander, while here you will only awaken very different sentiments, quite the opposite of slander and ill feeling." Anna remained for a moment in uncertainty. This witty man's flattering words, the childlike and naive sympathy shown her by Lisa Merkalov, and all this agreeable social atmosphere, so opposed to what she expected elsewhere, caused her a moment of hesitation. Could she not postpone that terrible moment of explanation? but remembering what she had to expect alone at home if she should not come to some decision, remembering the pain that she had felt when she pulled her hair with both hands, not knowing what she did, so great was her mental anguish, she took leave and went. End of chapter 18. Part 3, Chapter 19 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Vronsky, in spite of his worldly life and his apparent frivolity, was a man who detested confusion. Once, when still a lad in the school of pages, he found himself short of money, and met with a humiliating refusal when he tried to borrow. He vowed that henceforth he would not expose himself to such a humiliation again, and he kept his word. In order to keep his affairs in order, he made more or less often, according to circumstances, but at least 5 times a year, an examination of his affairs. He called this straightening his affairs, or, in French, faire sa lessive. The morning after the races Vronsky woke late, and without stopping to shave or take his bath, put on his kittel or soldier's linen frock, and, placing his money and bills and papers on the table, proceeded to the work of settling his accounts. Petritsky, knowing that his comrade was likely to be irritable when engaged in such occupation, quietly got up and slipped out without disturbing him. Every man acquainted, even to the minutest details, with all the complications of his surroundings, involuntarily supposes that the complications and tribulations of his life are a personal and private grievance peculiar to himself, and never thinks that others are subjected to the same complications of their personal troubles he himself is. Thus it seemed to Vronsky. And not without inward pride, and not without reason, he felt that, until the present time, he had done well in avoiding the embarrassments to which everyone else would have succumbed. But he felt that now it was necessary for him to examine into his affairs, so as not to be embarrassed. First, because it was the easiest to settle, Vronsky investigated his pecuniary status. He wrote in his fluent, delicate hand a schedule of all his debts, and adding them up, found that the total amounted to 17,000 rubles and some odd hundreds, which he let go for the sake of clearness. Counting up his ready money and his bank book, he had only 1,800 rubles, with no hope of more until the new year. Looking over the schedule of his debts, Vronsky classified them, putting them into 3 categories. First, the urgent debts, or, in other words, those that required ready money so that, in case of requisition, there might not be a moment of delay. These amounted to 4,000 rubles, 1,500 for his horse, and 2,500 as a guarantee for his young comrade, Benevsky, who had, in Vronsky's company, lost this amount in playing with the sharper. Vronsky, at the time, had wanted to hand over the money, since he had it with him, but Benevsky and Yashvin insisted on paying it rather than Vronsky, who had not been playing. This was all very well, but Vronsky knew that in this disgraceful affair, in which his only participation was going as Benevsky's guarantee, it was necessary to have these 2,500 rubles ready to throw at the rascal's head, and not to have any words with him. Thus, he had to reckon the category of urgent debts as 4,000 rubles. In the second category were 8,000 rubles of debts, and these were less imperative. These were what he owed on his stable account, for oats and hay, to his English trainer, and other incidentals. At a pinch, 2,000 would suffice to leave him perfectly easy in mind. The remaining debts were to his tailor and other furnishers, and they could wait. In conclusion, he found that he needed, for immediate use, 6,000 rubles, and he had only 1,800. For a man with an income of 100,000 rubles, as people supposed Vronsky to have, it would seem as if such debts as these could not be very embarrassing. But the fact was that he had not an income of 100,000 rubles. The large paternal estate, producing 200,000 rubles a year, had been divided between the 2 brothers. But when the elder brother, laden with debts, married the Princess Varya Tchikirov, the daughter of a decabrist, (Footnote: The decabrists were the revolutionists of December 1825, who were banished at the time of the accession of the Emperor Nicholas), who brought him no fortune, Alexey yielded him his share of the inheritance, reserving only an income of 25,000 roubles. He told his brother that this would be sufficient for him until he married, which he thought would never happen. His brother, who was in command of one of the most expensive regiments in the service, had only just married, and could not refuse this gift. His mother, who possessed an independent fortune, kept 25,000 roubles for herself, and gave her younger son a yearly allowance of 20,000 roubles, and Alexey spent the whole of it. Recently the countess, angry with him on account of his departure from Moscow and his disgraceful liaison, had ceased to remit him any money. So that Vronsky, who was accustomed to living on a 45,000 rouble footing, and having this year only 25,000, found himself in extremity. He could not apply to his mother to help him out of his difficulty, for her letter which he had received the day before angered him by the insinuations which it contained. She was ready, it said, to help him along in society, or to advance him in his career, but not in this present life which was scandalizing all the best people. His mother's attempt to bribe him wounded him in the tenderest spot in his heart, and he felt more coldly towards her than ever. He could not retract his magnanimous promise given to his brother, although he felt now, in view of his rather uncertain relationship with Madame Karenin, that his magnanimous promise had been given too hastily, and that, even though he were not married, the 100,000 roubles might stand him in good stead, but it was impossible to retract. The impossibility of taking back what he had given was made clear to him, especially when he remembered his brother's wife, when he remembered how this gentle, excellent Varya had always made him understand that she should not forget his generosity and never cease to appreciate it. It would be as impossible to strike a woman, to steal, or to lie. There was only one possible and practical thing, and Vronsky adopted it without a moment's hesitation. To borrow 10,000 roubles from a usurer, there was no difficulty about this, to reduce his expenses as much as he could, and to sell his racehorses. Having decided to do this, he immediately wrote a letter to Rolandaki, who had many times offered to buy his stud. Then he sent for his English trainer and the usurer, and devoted the money which he had on hand to various accounts. Having finished this business, he wrote a cold and sharp reply to his mother, and then, taking from his portfolio Anna's last 3 letters, he reread them, burned them, and, remembering his last conversation with her, fell into deep meditation. End of chapter 19. Part 3, Chapter 20 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Vronsky's life had been especially happy, because he had a special code of rules, which infallibly determined all he ought to do and ought not to do. This code embraced a very small circle of duties, but the rules allowed no manner of question, and as Vronsky never had occasion to go outside of this circle, he had never been obliged to hesitate about what he had to do. These rules prescribed unfailingly that it was necessary to pay gambling debts, but not his tailor's bills, and it was not permissible to tell lies, except to women, that it was not right to deceive anyone except a husband, that insults could be committed but never pardoned. All these precepts might be wrong and illogical, but they were indubitable, and in fulfilling them, Vronsky felt that he was calm and had the right to hold his head high. Only very recently, however, and during the progress of his intimacy with Anna, Vronsky began to perceive that his code did not fully determine all conditions, and the future promised to present difficulties and doubts through the labyrinth of which he could not find the guiding thread. Hitherto his relations with Anna and her husband had been, on his part, simple and clear. They were in harmony with the code that guided him. She was a perfect lady, and she had given him her love. He loved her, and therefore she had a right to his respect, even more than if she had been his legal wife. He would have cut off his hand sooner than permit himself a word or an allusion that might wound her, or that would seem to fail in that respect on which, as a woman, she ought to count. His relations with society were also clear. All might know or suspect his relations with her, but no one should dare to speak of it. At the first hint, he was prepared to cause the speaker to hold his peace, and to respect the non-existent honour of the woman whom he loved. Still more clear were his relations to the husband. From the first moment when Anna gave him her love, he considered his right, and his only, imprescriptible. The husband was merely a superfluous and meddlesome person. Without doubt, he was in a pitiable position. But what could be done about it? The only right that was left him was to demand satisfaction with arms in their hands, and for this Vronsky was wholly willing. In the last few days, however, new complications had arisen in their relationship, and Vronsky was alarmed at his uncertainty. Only the evening before, Anna had confessed that she was pregnant, and he felt that this news and what she expected from him demanded something that was not defined by the code of rules by which he ruled his life. Indeed, he was taken unawares, and at the first moment, when she told him her situation, his heart bade him take her from her husband. He saw this, but now on reflection he clearly saw that it would be better not to do so, but at the same time he was alarmed and perplexed. If I urge her to leave her husband, it would mean, unite her life with mine. Am I ready for that? How can I elope with her when I have no money? Let us admit that I could manage that. But how can I take her away while I am connected with the service? If I should decide upon this, I should have to get money and throw up my commission. Here he fell into thought. The question of resigning or not brought him face to face with another interest of his life known only to himself, though it formed the principal spur to his action. Ambition had been the dream of his childhood and youth, a dream which he did not confess even to himself, but which was nevertheless a passion so strong that now it fought with his love. His first advances in society, and in his military career, had been brilliant, but 2 years before he had made a serious blunder. Wishing to show his independence, and to cause a sensation, he refused a promotion offered him, with the hope that his refusal would put a still higher value upon him. But it seemed that he was too confident, and since then he had been neglected. Finding himself reduced nolens volens to the position of an independent man, he accepted it, behaving with perfect propriety and wisdom, as if he had nothing to complain of, and counted himself slighted by no one, but asked only to be left in peace to amuse himself as he pleased. In reality, as the year went on, and even before he went to Moscow, this pleasure had begun to pall on him. He felt that this independent position of a man capable of doing anything, but caring to do nothing, was beginning to grow tame, that many people were beginning to think that he was incapable of doing anything, instead of being a good, honourable young fellow. His relations with Madame Karenina, by making such a sensation and attracting attention to him, for a time calmed the gnawings of the worm of ambition. But lately this worm had begun to gnaw with renewed energy. Serpukhoi, the friend of his childhood, belonging to his own circle, a chum of his in the school of pages, who had graduated with him, who had been his rival in the classroom and in gymnasium, in his pranks and in his dreams of ambition, had just returned from Central Asia, where he had been promoted 2 tchins and won honours rarely given to such a young general. He had only just come to Petersburg, and people were talking about him as a new rising star of the first magnitude. Just Vronsky's age, and his intimate friend, he was a general, and was expecting an appointment which would give him great influence in the affairs of the country, while Vronsky, though he was independent and brilliant, and loved by a lovely woman, was only a rotmeister, or a cavalry captain, whom they allowed to remain as independent as he pleased. Of course, he said to himself, I am not envious of Serpukhoi, and could not be. But his promotion proves that a man like me needs only to bide his time in order to make a rapid rise in his profession. 3 years ago he was in the same position as I am now. If I left the service, I should burn my ships. If I stay in the service, I lose nothing. She herself told me that she did not want to change her position, and I, who am sure of her love, cannot be envious of Serpukhoi. And, slowly twisting his moustache, he arose from the table and began to walk up and down the room. His eyes shone with extraordinary brilliancy, and he was conscious of that calm, even, joyous state of mind which he always felt after he had cleared up any situation. All was now clear and orderly as ever. He shaved, took a cold water bath, dressed, and prepared to go out. End of chapter 20. Part 3, Chapter 21 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. "I was coming for you," said Petritsky, entering the room. "Your cleaning up took a long time today, didn't it? Are you through?" "All through," said Vronsky, smiling only with his eyes and continuing to twist the ends of his moustache deliberately, as if, after this work of regulation were accomplished, any rash and quick motion might destroy it. "You always come out of this operation as from a bath," said Petritsky. "I come from Gritskas," so they called their regimental commander. "They are waiting for you." Vronsky looked at his comrade without replying. His thoughts were elsewhere. "Ah, then that music is at his house," he remarked, hearing the well-known sounds of waltzes and polkas played by a military band. "What is the celebration?" "Serpukhovskoy has come." "Ah," said Vronsky, "I did not know it." The smile in his eyes was brighter than ever. Having once decided for himself that he was happy in his love, he had elected to sacrifice his ambition to his love. Having at least taken on himself to play this part, he could feel neither envy at Serpukhovskoy nor vexation because he, returning to the regiment, had not come first to see him. Serpukhovskoy was a good friend of his, and Vronsky was glad for him. "Ah, I am very glad." The regimental commander, Demin, lived in a large seignorial mansion. All the company had assembled on the lower front balcony. What first struck Vronsky's eyes as he reached the door were the singers of the regiment, in summer uniform, grouped around a keg of vodka, and the healthy, jovial face of the regimental commander as he stood surrounded by his officers. He had come out on the front step of the balcony, and was screaming louder than the band, which was playing one of Offenbach's quadrilles. He was giving some orders and gesticulating to a group of soldiers on one side. A group of soldiers, the Wachmister, or sergeant, and a few non-commissioned officers, reached the balcony at the same instant with Vronsky. The regimental commander, who had been to the table, returned with a glass of champagne to the front steps and proposed the toast. "To the health of our old comrade, the brave general, Prince Serpukhovskoy! Hurrah!" Behind the regimental commander came Serpukhovskoy, smiling, with a glass in his hand. "You are always young, Bondarenko," said he to the sergeant, a ruddy-cheeked soldier, who stood directly in front of him. Vronsky had not seen Serpukhovskoy for 3 years. He had grown older and wore whiskers, but he was the same well-built man, striking not so much for his good looks as for the nobility and gentleness of his face and his whole bearing. The only change that Vronsky noted in him was the slight but constant radiance which can generally be seen in the faces of people who have succeeded and made everybody else believe in their success. Vronsky had seen it in other people, and now he detected it in Serpukhovskoy. As he descended the steps he caught sight of Vronsky, and a smile of joy irradiated his face. He nodded to him, lifting his wine cup as a greeting, and at the same time to signify that first he must drink with the sergeant, who, standing perfectly straight, had puckered his lips for the kiss. "Well, here he is!" cried the regimental commander. "But Yashvin was telling me that you were in one of your bad humors." Serpukhovskoy, having kissed the young sergeant's moist, fresh lips, wiped his mouth with his handkerchief and came to Vronsky. "Well, how glad I am!" he said, shaking hands and drawing him on one side. "Bring him along!" cried the regimental commander to Yashvin, pointing to Vronsky, and descending to join the soldiers. "Why weren't you at the races yesterday? I expected to see you," said Vronsky to Serpukhovskoy, studying his face. "I did come, but too late. Excuse me," he said. And, turning to his aide, "Please have this distributed with my thanks, only have it get to the men." And he hurriedly took out of his pocket-book 300-ruble notes, and the colour came into his face. "Vronsky, will you have something to eat or drink?" asked Yashvin. "Hey, bring something to the count here. There, now, drink this." The feasting at the regimental commander's lasted a long time. They drank a great deal. They toasted Serpukhowskoy and carried him on their shoulders. They cheered also the regimental commander. Then the regimental commander and Petritsky danced a Russian dance, while the regimental singers made the music. And when he was tired, he sat down on a bench in the court, and tried to prove to Yashvin Russia's superiority over Prussia, especially in cavalry charges, and the gaiety calmed down for a moment. Serpukhowskoy went into the house to wash his hands, and found Vronsky in the toilet-room. Vronsky was splashing the water. He had taken off his kittel, and was sousing his head and his handsome neck under the tap of the basin, and rubbing them with his hands. When he finished his ablutions, he sat down by Serpukhowskoy. They sat together on a divanchik, and a conversation very interesting to both parties arose between them. "I have learned all about you through my wife," said Serpukhowskoy. "I am glad that you see her so often." "She is a friend of Varya's, and they are the only women in Petersburg that I care to see," said Vronsky with a smile. He smiled because he foresaw on what subject the conversation would turn, and it was pleasing to him. "The only ones?" repeated Serpukhowskoy, also smiling. "Yes, and I, too, know all about you, but not through your wife only," said Vronsky, cutting the allusion short by the sudden stern expression of his face. "I am very glad at your success, but not the least surprised. I expected even more." Serpukhowskoy smiled again. This flattering opinion of him pleased him, and he saw no reason to hide it. "I, on the contrary, I confess frankly, expected less. But I am glad, very glad. I am ambitious. It is my weakness, and I confess it." "Perhaps you wouldn't confess it if you weren't successful," suggested Vronsky. "I don't think so," replied Serpukhowskoy, smiling again. "I would not say that life would not be worth living without it, but it would be tiresome. Of course, I may be mistaken, but it seems to me that I have some of the qualifications necessary to the sphere of activity which I have chosen, and that in my hands power of any sort soever would be better placed than in the hands of many whom I know," said Serpukhowskoy, with the radiant expression of success. "And therefore the nearer I am to this, the more contented I feel." "Perhaps this is true for you, but not for everybody. I used to think so, and yet I live and no longer find that ambition is the only aim of existence." "Here we have it! Here we have it!" cried Serpukhowskoy, laughing. "I began by saying that I heard about your refusal. Of course I approved of you. There is a way for everything, and I think that your action itself was well, but you did not do it in the right way." "What is done is done, and you know I never go back on what I have done. Besides, I am very well fixed." "Very well, for a time, but you will not be contented so forever. I do not refer to your brother. He is a very good fellow, just like this host of ours. Hark, hear that?" he added, hearing the shouts and hurrahs. "He may be happy, but this will not satisfy you." "I don't say that I am satisfied." "Well, this is not the only thing. Such men as you are necessary." "To whom?" "To whom? To society, to Russia. Russia needs men. She needs a party, otherwise all is going, and will go, to the dogs." "What do you mean? Burntanev's party against the Russian communists?" "No," said Serpukhowskoy, with a grimace of vexation, that he should be accused of any such nonsense. "Tout ça est un blague. All that is fudge. This always has been and always will be. There aren't any communists, but intriguing people must needs invent some malignant dangerous party. It's an old joke. No, a powerful party is needed, of independent men, like you and me." "But why?" Vronsky named several influential men. But why aren't they among the independents? Simply because they had not, through birth, an independent position, or a name, and have not lived near the sun, as we have. They can be bought by money or flattery, and to maintain themselves they must fix on a certain course and follow it, though they do not attach any importance to it, and even though it may be bad. They have only one object in view, the means of securing a home at the expense of the crown and certain salaries. Cela n'est pas plus fin que ça, when you look at their cards. Maybe I am worse or more foolish than they, though I don't see why I should be. But I have, and you have, the one inestimable advantage, that it is harder to buy us, and such men are more than ever necessary now." Vronsky listened attentively, not only because of the meaning of his words, but because of their connection with the case of Serpukhowsky himself, who was about to engage in the struggle with power, and was entering into that official world with its sympathies and antipathies, while he was accustomed only with the interests of his squadron. Vronsky perceived how strong Serpukhowsky might be, with his unfailing aptitude for invention, his quickness of comprehension, his intellect and fluent speech, so rarely met with in the circle in which he lived. And, though his conscience reproached him, he felt a twinge of envy. "All that I need for this is the one essential thing," said he, "the desire for power. I had it, but it is gone." "Excuse me, I don't believe you," said Serpukhowsky, smiling. "No, it is true. True. Now, to be frank with you," persisted Vronsky. "Yes, true now, that is another affair. This now may not last forever." "Maybe." "You say maybe, and I tell you certainly not," continued Serpukhowsky, as if he divined his thought. "And this is why I wanted to see you. You acted as you felt was necessary. I understand that, but it is not necessary for you to stick to it. All I ask of you is carte blanche for the future. I am not your patron, and yet why should I not take you under my protection? Have you not often done as much for me? I hope that our friendship stands above that. There," said he, smiling at him tenderly like a woman. "Give me carte blanche. Come out of your regiment, and I will help you along so that it won't be known." "But understand that I want nothing," said Vronsky, "except that all should be as it has been." Serpukhowsky arose and stood facing him. "You say that all must be as it has been. I understand what you mean, but listen to me. We are of the same age. Maybe you have known more women than I." His smile and his gesture told Vronsky to have no fear that he would not touch gently and delicately on the tender spot. "But I am married, and, believe me, as some one or other wrote, he who knows only his wife, and loves her, understands all women better than if he had known 1,000. "We are coming directly," cried Vronsky to an officer who looked into the room and said he was sent by the regimental commander. Vronsky now felt curious to hear and to know what Serpukhowsky would say to him. "And this is my idea. Women are the principal stumbling block in the way of a man's activity. It is hard to love a woman and to do anything else. There is only one way to love with comfort and without hindrance, and that is to marry. And how can I explain to you what I mean?" continued Serpukhowsky, who was fond of metaphors. Wait. Yes. How can you carry a burden and do anything with your hands until the burden is tied on your back? And so it is with marriage. And I found this out when I married. My hands suddenly became free. But to carry this fardeau without marriage, your hands will become so full that you can't do anything. Look at Mazenkov, Krupov. They ruined their careers through women." "But what women?" said Vronsky, remembering the French woman and the actress for whom these two men had formed attachments. "The higher the woman is in the social scale, the greater the difficulty. It is just the same as, not to carry your fardeau in your hands, but to tear it from some other man." "You have never loved," murmured Vronsky, looking straight ahead and thinking of Anna. "Perhaps. But you think of what I have told you. And one more thing. Women are all more material than men. We make something immense out of love. but they are all terre à terre, of the earth, earthy. "We'll be there immediately," he said, addressing the lackey who was coming into the room. But the lackey was not a messenger for him, as he supposed. The lackey brought Vronsky a note. "A man brought this from the Princess Tverskaya." Vronsky hastily read the note and grew red in the face. "I have a headache. I'm going home," he said to Serpuhovskoy. "Well then, prощай, farewell. Will you not give me carte blanche?" "We will talk about it by and by. I will call on you in Petersburg." Chapter 22. Part 3, Chapter 22 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. It was already 6 o'clock, and in order not to miss his appointment, or to go with his own horses, which everybody knew, Vronsky engaged Yashvin's hired carriage, and told the izvoshchik to drive with all speed. It was a spacious old carriage with room for 4. He sat in one corner, stretched his legs out on the empty seat, and began to think. The confused consciousness of the order in which he had regulated his affairs, the confused recollection of the friendship and flattery of Serpuhovskoy, who assured him that he was an indispensable man, and most of all, the expectation of the coming interview, conspired to give him a keen sense of the joy of living. This impression was so powerful that he could not keep from smiling. He stretched his legs, threw one knee over the other, felt for the contusion that his fall had given him the evening before, and drew several long breaths with full lungs. "Good, very good," he said to himself. Oftentimes before he had felt a pleasure in the possession of his body, but never had he so loved it, or loved himself, as now. It was even pleasurable to feel the slight soreness in his leg. Pleasurable was the mouse-like sensation of motion on his breast when he breathed. This same bright, fresh, August day, which so impressed Anna with its hopelessness, stimulated, vitalized him, and cooled his face and neck, which still burned from the reaction after his bath. The odor of brilliantine from his mustaches seemed pleasant to him in this fresh atmosphere. Everything that he saw from the carriage window seemed to him in this cool, pure air, in this pale light of the dying day, fresh, joyous, and healthful, like himself. And the housetops shining in the rays of the setting sun, the outlines of the fences and the edifices along the way, and the shapes of the occasional pedestrians and carriages hurrying hither and thither, and the motionless green of the trees, and the lawns, and the fields with their straight-cut rows of potato hills, and the oblique shadows cast by the houses and the trees, and even by the potato hills, all was as beautiful as an exquisite landscape just from the master's hand, and freshly varnished. "Make haste! Make haste!" he shouted, pushing up through the window a 3-ruble note to the driver, who turned round and looked down at him. The izvoshchik's hand arranged something about the lantern, then the crack of the knout was heard, and the carriage whirled rapidly over the even pavement. "I need nothing but this pleasure," he thought, as his eyes rested on the knob of the bell, fastened between the windows, and he imagined Anna as she seemed when he last saw her. "The farther I go, the more I love her. Ah, here's the garden of the Verda Dacha. Where shall I find her? How? But why did she make this appointment? And why did she write on Betsy's note?" This struck him for the first time, but he had no time to think about it. He stopped the driver before they reached the driveway, and, getting out of the carriage, he went up the walk which led to the house. There was no one on the avenue, but looking toward the right he saw her. Her face was covered with a veil, but with a joyful glance he recognized her immediately, by her graceful motion as she walked, by the slope of her shoulders, and the poise of her head, and he felt as if an electric shock had passed through him. With new strength he felt the joy of life and of action, even from the movements of his limbs to the involuntary motion of respiration, and something made his lips twitch. When he came near her, she eagerly seized his hand. "You are not angry because I asked you to come?" I absolutely needed to see you," she said, and the serious and stern closing of the lips which he saw under the veil quickly put an end to his jubilant spirits. "I angry? But how did you come? When?" "No matter about that," she said, taking Vronsky's arm. "Come, I must have a talk with you." He perceived that something had happened, and that their interview would not be joyful. While with her, he could not control his will. Though he did not know what her agitation portended, yet he felt that it had taken possession of him also. "What is it? What is the matter?" he asked, pressing her arm, and trying to read her thoughts by her face. She went a few steps in silence, so as to get her breath. Then she suddenly halted. "I did not tell you last evening," she began, breathing fast and painfully, "that, on the way home with Alexey Alexandrovitch, I confessed to him everything. I said that I could not be his wife, and I told him all." He listened, involuntarily leaning toward her, as if he wished to lighten for her the difficulty of this confidence. But as soon as she finished speaking, he suddenly drew himself up, and his face assumed a haughty and stern expression. Yes, that was better, 1,000 times better. I understand how hard it must have been," he said. But she did not heed his words. She read his thoughts by the expression of his face. She could not know that the expression of his face arose from the first thought that came into his mind, the thought that a duel could not now be avoided. Never had a thought of a duel entered her head, and therefore she interpreted the momentary expression of sternness in a quite different way. Since the arrival of her husband's letter, she felt in the bottom of her heart that all would remain as before, that she should not have the strength to sacrifice her position in the world, to abandon her son and join her lover. The morning spent with the Princess Tverskaya confirmed her in this. But this interview with Vronsky seemed to her to be of vital importance. She hoped that it might change their relations and save her. If, on hearing this news, he had said decidedly, passionately, without a moment's hesitation, "Leave all and come with me," she would have even abandoned her son and gone with him. But what she told him did not produce in him at all the impression which she had expected. He seemed, if anything, vexed and angry. "It was not hard for me at all. It came out of its own accord," she said with a touch of irritation. "And here." She drew her husband's letter from her glove. I understand, interrupted Vronsky, taking the letter but not reading it, and trying to calm Anna. "The one thing I wanted, the one thing I prayed for, to put an end to this situation, so that I could devote my whole life to your happiness." "Why do you say that to me?" she asked. "Can I doubt it? If I doubted—" "Who are those coming?" asked Vronsky abruptly, seeing two ladies coming in their direction. "Perhaps they know us." And he hastily drew Anna with him down a side alley. "Ach, it is all the same to me," she said. Her lips trembled, and it seemed to Vronsky that her eyes looked at him from under her veil with strange hatred. "As I said, in all this affair I cannot doubt you. But here is what he wrote me. Read it." And again she halted. Again, as when he first learned of Anna's rupture with her husband, Vronsky, beginning to read this letter, involuntarily abandoned himself to the impression awakened in him by the thought of his relations to the deceived husband. Now that he had the letter in his hand, he imagined the challenge which he would receive that day or the next, and the duel itself, at the moment when, with the same cool and haughty expression which now set his face, he would stand in front of his adversary and, having discharged his weapon in the air, would wait the outraged husband's shot. At this very instant Serpukhowskoy's words and what he himself had felt that day flashed through his mind. "Better not to tie yourself down." And she knew that he could not express his thought before her. After he read the note, he raised his eyes to her, and there was indecision in his look. She instantly perceived that he had thought this matter over before. She knew that whatever he said to her, he would not say all that he thought, and she realized that her last hope had vanished. This was not what she had desired. "You see what sort of a man he is," said she, with faltering voice. "Excuse me, but I am glad of this," said Vronsky, interrupting. "For God's sake, let me speak," he quickly added, beseeching her with his look to give him time to explain his words. "I am glad because this cannot and never could go on as he imagines." "Why can't it?" demanded Anna, holding back her tears and evidently attaching no importance to what he said. She felt that her fate was already settled. Vronsky meant that after the duel, which he felt was inevitable, this situation must be changed, but he said something quite different. "It cannot go on. I hope that now you will leave him. I hope," he stumbled and grew red, "that you will allow me to take charge of our lives and regulate them. Tomorrow," he began to say. She did not allow him to finish. "And my son," she cried, "do you see what he writes? I must leave him. But I cannot and I will not do that." "But for God's sake, which is better, to leave your son, or to continue this humiliating situation?" "For whom is it a humiliating situation?" "For all of us, and especially for you." "You say humiliating. Don't say that. For me that word has no meaning," she said, with trembling voice. She could not bear now to have him tell her a falsehood. Her love for him was trembling in the balance, and she wished to love him. "You must know that for me, on that day when I first loved you, everything was transformed. For me there was one thing, and only one thing, your love. If it is mine, then I feel myself so high, so firm, that nothing can be humiliating to me. I am proud of my position, because proud. She did not say why she was proud. Tears of shame and despair choked her utterance. She stopped and began to sob. He also felt that something rose in his throat. For the first time in his life he felt ready to cry. He could not have said what affected him so. He was sorry for her, and he felt that he could not help her. And, more than all, he knew that he was the cause of her unhappiness, that he had done something abominable. "Then a divorce is impossible?" he asked gently. She shook her head without replying. "Then could you not take your son and leave him?" "Yes, but all this depends on him. Now I must go to him," she said dryly. Her presentiment that all would be as before was verified. "I shall be in Petersburg Tuesday, and everything will be decided." "Yes," she repeated, "but we shall not speak any more about that." Anna's carriage, which she sent away with the order to come back for her at the railing of the Verde garden, was approaching. Anna took leave of Vronsky and went home. Chapter 22. Part 3, Chapter 23 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. The commission of the 2nd of June usually held its sittings on Monday. Alexey Alexandrovitch entered the committee room, bowed to the members and the president as usual, and took his place, laying his hand on the papers made ready for him. Among the number were the data which he needed, and the outline of the proposition that he intended to make. These notes, however, were not necessary. His grasp of the subject was complete, and he did not need to refresh his memory as to what he was going to say. He knew that when the time came, and he should see his adversary vainly endeavoring to put on an expression of indifference, his speech would come of itself in better shape than he could now determine. He felt that the meaning of his speech was so great that every word would have its importance. Meantime, as he listened to the reading of the report, he had a most innocent and inoffensive expression. No one, seeing his white hands, with their swollen veins, his delicate, long fingers doubling up the two ends of the sheet of white paper lying before him, and his expression of weariness, as he sat with head on one side, would have believed it possible that, in a few moments, from his lips would proceed a speech which would raise a terrible tempest, cause the members of the commission to outdo one another in screaming, and oblige the president to call them to order. When the report was finished, Alexey Alexandrovitch, in his weak, shrill voice, said that he had a few observations to make in regard to the situation of the foreign tribes. Attention was concentrated on him. Alexey Alexandrovitch cleared his throat, and, not looking at his adversary, but, as he always did at the beginning of his speeches, addressing the person who sat nearest in front of him, who happened to be a little, meek old man without the slightest importance in the commission, began to deliver his views. When he reached the matter of the fundamental and organic law, his adversary leaped to his feet and began to reply. Stremov, who was also a member of the commission, and also touched to the quick, arose to defend himself, and the session proved to be excessively stormy. But Alexey Alexandrovitch triumphed, and his proposition was accepted. The 3 new commissions were appointed, and the next day in a certain Petersburg circle this session formed the staple topic of conversation. Alexey Alexandrovitch's success far outstripped his anticipations. The next morning, which was Tuesday, Alexey Alexandrovitch, on awaking, recalled with pleasure his victory of the day before, and he could not repress a smile, although he wanted to appear indifferent, when the director of the chancellery, wishing to flatter him, told him of the rumours which had reached his ears in regard to the proceedings of the commission. Occupied as he was with the director of the chancellery, Alexey Alexandrovitch absolutely forgot that the day was Tuesday, the day set by him for Anna Arkadyevna's return, and he was surprised and disagreeably impressed when a domestic came to announce that she had come. Anna reached Petersburg early in the morning. A carriage had been sent for her in response to her telegram, and so Alexey Alexandrovitch might have known of her coming. But when she came, he did not go to receive her. She was told that he had not yet gone out, but was busy with the director of the chancellery. She bade the servant announce her arrival, and then went to her boudoir and began to unpack her things, expecting that he would come to her. But an hour passed, and he did not appear. She went to the dining-room, under the pretext of giving some orders, and spoke unusually loud, thinking that he would join her there. But still he did not come, though she heard him come to the door of his library, accompanying the director of the chancellery. She knew that it was his habit about this time to go to his office, and she wanted to see him before that, so that their plan of action might be decided. She passed through the hall, and, finally making up her mind, went to him. She stepped into the library. Dressed in his uniform, apparently ready to take his departure, he was sitting at a little table, leaning his elbows on it, and wrapped in melancholy thought. She saw him before he noticed her, and she knew that he was thinking of her. When he caught sight of her, he started to get up, hesitated, and then, for the first time since Anna had known him, he blushed. Then, quickly rising, he advanced toward her, not looking at her eyes, but at her forehead and hair. He came to her, took her by the hand, and invited her to sit down. "I am very glad that you have come," he stammered, sitting down near her and evidently desiring to talk with her. Several times he began to speak, but hesitated. Although she was prepared for this interview, and had made up her mind to defend herself and accuse him, she did not know what to say to him, and she felt sorry for him, and so the silence lasted some little time. "Is Serosa well?" at length he asked, and, without waiting for an answer, he added, "I shall not dine at home today. I have to leave immediately." "I intended to start for Moscow," said Anna. "No, you did very, very well to come home," he replied, and again was silent. Seeing that it was beyond his strength to begin the conversation, she herself began. "Alexey Alexandrovitch," she said, looking at him, and not dropping her eyes under his gaze, which was still concentrated on her high dress, "I am a guilty woman. I am a wicked woman. But I am what I have been, what I told you I was, and have come to tell you that I cannot change." "I did not ask you about this," he replied instantly, with sudden resolution, and with an expression of hate, looking straight into her eyes. "I presupposed that." Under the influence of anger, he apparently regained control of all his faculties. "But as I told you then, and wrote you," he spoke in a sharp, shrill voice, "I now repeat that I am not obliged to know this. I ignore it. Not all women are so good as you are, to hasten to give their husbands such very pleasant news." He laid a special stress on the word "приятное," pleasant. "I will ignore it for the present, as long as the world does not know, as long as my name is not dishonoured. I, therefore, only warn you that our relations must remain as they always have been, and that only in case of your compromising yourself shall I be forced to take measures to protect my honour." "But our relations cannot remain as they have been," said she, with timid accents, looking at him in terror. As she once more saw his undemonstrative gestures, heard his mocking voice with its sharp childish tones, all the pity that she had begun to feel for him was driven away by the aversion that he inspired, and she had only a feeling of fear, which arose from the fact that she did not see any light in regard to their relations. "I cannot be your wife, when she began. He laughed with a cold and wicked laugh. "It must needs be that the manner of life which you have chosen is reflected in your ideas. I have too much esteem or contempt, or rather I esteem your past and despise your present, too much for me to accept the interpretation which you put on my words." Anna sighed and bowed her head. "Besides, I do not understand how you, having so much independence," he continued, growing excited, "and telling your husband up and down of your infidelity, and not finding anything blameworthy in it, as it seems, how can you find anything blameworthy either in the fulfilment of a wife's duties to her husband?" "Alexey Alexandrovitch, what do you require of me?" "I require that I may never meet this man here, and that you comport yourself so that neither the world nor our servants can accuse you, that you do not see him. It seems to me that this is little, and in doing this you will enjoy the rights of an honourable wife, though you do not fulfil the obligations. This is all that I have to say to you. Now it is time for me to go. I shall not dine at home." He got up and went to the door. Anna also arose. He silently bowed and allowed her to pass. Chapter 24. Part 3, Chapter 24 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. The night spent by Levin on the hayrick was not without its lesson. His way of farming became repugnant to him, and entirely lost its interest. Notwithstanding the excellent crops, never, or at least it seemed to him that never, had there been such failure and such unfriendly relations between him and the muzhiks as this year. And now the reasons for this failure and this animosity were perfectly clear to him. The pleasure which he found in work itself, the resulting acquaintance with the muzhiks, the envy which seized him when he saw them and their lives, the desire to lead such a life himself, which on that night had not been visionary, but real. Now that he had thought over all the details necessary to carry out his desire, all this taken together had so changed his views in regard to the management of his estate that he could not take the same interest in it as before, and he could not help seeing how these very unpleasant relations with the labourers met him at every new undertaking. The herd of improved cows like Pava, all the fertilized lands ploughed with European ploughs, 9 equal fields set round with young trees, the 90 desyatins covered with dressing well ploughed in, the deep drills and other improvements, all was excellent as far as it concerned only himself, or himself and the people who were in sympathy with him. But now he clearly saw, and his work, his treatise on rural economy, in which the principal element was found to be the labourer, helped him to this conclusion, that his present way of carrying on his estate was only a cruel and wicked struggle between him and the labourers, in which on one side, on his side, was a constant effort to change everything to what he thought a better model, while on the other side was the natural order of things. In this struggle he saw that on his side there were effort and lofty purpose, and on the other no effort or purpose, and that the result was that the estate went from bad to worse. Beautiful tools were destroyed, beautiful cattle and lands ruined. The principal objection was the energy absolutely wasted in this matter, and he could not help thinking now, when his thought was laid bare, that the aim of his energies was itself unworthy. In reality, where lay this quarrel? He insisted on having every penny of his own, and he could not help insisting on it, because he was obliged to use his energies to the utmost, otherwise he would not have wherewithal to pay his labourers, and they insisted on working lazily and comfortably, in other words, as they had always done. It was for his interest that every labourer should do his very best, above all, should strive not to break the winnowing machines, the horse rakes, the threshing machines, so that he might accomplish what he was doing. But the labourer wanted to do his work as easily as possible, with long breathing spaces, with plenty of time for resting, and, what was more, without being bothered to think. This year Levin had this experience at every step. He sent men to mow the clover fields, selecting the poorer portions to be done first, where the intermixture of grass and wormwood made the crop unfit for seed, and they mowed his best fields, those reserved for seed, justifying themselves by saying that they had done what the overseer ordered, and trying to console him with the assurance that it would make splendid fodder. But he knew that they did this because these fields were the easiest ones to mow. He sent out the haymaking machine, but the muzhiks broke it on the first few rows because the driver, sitting on the box seat, disliked having the arms of the machine waving over his head, and they tried to console him with it by saying, "Oh, it's all right, the women will do the work easy enough." The new ploughs were condemned as good for nothing, because the muzhik did not think to raise the blade on turning a corner, but wrenched it round through the soil, thus tearing up the land and straining the horses, and here again they urged Levin to have patience with them. The horses strayed into the wheat, for the reason that no one would act regularly as night watchman, the muzhiks, in spite of strict orders to the contrary, insisting on taking the duty in turns, and Vanka, who had been at work all day, fell asleep during his watch. When accused, he acknowledged his fault and only said, "Do what you please with me." 3 of the best calves were poisoned. They were allowed to get into the clover aftermath without giving them water. The result was that they were blown out and died. But the muzhiks would not believe that it was the clover that did the harm. They tried to console Levin by informing him that one of his neighbours had lost 112 head within 3 days in the same way. All these mishaps took place, not because anyone wished ill either to Levin or to his estate. On the contrary, he knew that the muzhiks loved him and called him a simple-minded gentleman, prosтой barin, which was the highest praise. But these mishaps happened simply because the muzhiks liked to work merrily and carelessly, and his interests were not only strange and incomprehensible to them, but even fatally clashed with what they thought their own true interests. For a long time Levin had felt that there was something unsatisfactory in his methods. He saw that his canoe was leaking, but he could not find the leaks, and he did not search for them, perhaps on purpose to deceive himself. Nothing would be left to him if he should allow his illusions to perish. But now he could no longer deceive himself. Not only had his system of management become uninteresting, but it had begun actually to disgust him, and he felt he could no longer continue it. Besides all this, Kitty Shtcherbatsky was within 10 versts of him, and he wanted to see her, and could not. Darya Alexandrovna Oblonskaya, when he called on her, invited him to come with the express purpose of renewing his offer to her sister, who, as she pretended to think, now cared for him. Levin himself, after he caught the glimpse of Kitty Shtcherbatsky, felt that he had not ceased to love her, but he could not go to the Oblonskys, because he knew that she was there. The fact that he had offered himself and she had refused him put an insurmountable barrier between them. "I cannot ask her to be my wife simply because she cannot be the wife of the man she wanted," he said to himself. The thought of this made him cold and hostile toward her. "I have not the strength to go and talk with her without a sense of reproach, to look at her without angry feelings, and she would feel even more incensed against me, and justly so. And besides, how can I go there now, after what Darya Alexandrovna told me? How can I help showing that I know what she told me? That I go with magnanimity, to pardon her, to be reconciled to her. I, in her presence, play the role of a pardoning and honor-conferring lover to her. Why did Darya Alexandrovna tell me that? If I had met her accidentally, then perhaps everything might have been arranged of itself. But now it is impossible, impossible." Darya Alexandrovna sent him a note asking the loan of a side saddle for Kitty. "They tell me you have a saddle," she wrote. "I hope that you will bring it yourself." This was too much for him. How could a sensible woman of any delicacy so lower her sister? He wrote 10 notes and tore them all up, and then sent the saddle without any reply. To write that he would come was impossible, because he could not come. To write that he could not come because he was busy or was going away somewhere was still worse. So he sent the saddle without any reply, and, with the consciousness that he was doing something disgraceful, on the next day, leaving the now disagreeable charge of the estate to the overseer, he set off to a distant district where there were magnificent snipe marshes, to see his friend Shyavsky, who had lately invited him to fulfill an old project of making him a visit. The snipe marshes in the district of Surov had long been an attraction to Levin, but on account of his farm work he had kept postponing his visit there. Now he was glad to escape from the neighborhood of the Shtcherbatskys, and especially from his estate, and to go on a hunting expedition, for which all his tribulations was a sovereign remedy. Chapter 24. Part 3, Chapter 25 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. In the district of Surov there were neither railways nor post roads, and Levin took his own horses and went in a tarantass or travelling carriage. When he was halfway, he stopped to get a meal at the house of a rich muzhik. The host, who was a bald, robust old man, with a great red beard, growing grey on the cheeks, opened the gate, crowding up against the post to let the troika enter. Pointing the coachman to a place under the shed in his large, neat, and orderly new courtyard with charred sokhas or wooden ploughs, the old man invited Levin to enter the room. A neatly clad young girl, with galoshes on her bare feet, stooping down, was washing up the floor in the new entry. When she saw Levin's dog, she was startled and screamed, but immediately laughed at her own terror when she found the dog would not bite. With her bare arm she pointed Levin to the living room, then, stooping down again, she hid her handsome face and continued her scrubbing. "Will you have the samovar?" she asked. "Yes, please." The living room was large, with a Dutch stove and a partition. Under the sacred images stood a table ornamented with colored designs, a bench, and 2 chairs. Near the doorway was a cupboard with dishes. The window shutters were closed, there were a few flies, and it was so neat that Levin took care that Laska, who had been flying over the road and was covered with splashes of mud, should not soil the floor, and bade her lie down in a corner near the door. After glancing into the living room, Levin went to the back of the house. A good-looking girl in galoshes, swinging her empty pails on the yoke, ran to get him water from the well. "Lively there!" gaily shouted the old man to her, and then he turned to Levin. "So, sir, are you going to see Nikolai Ivanovitch Sviazhsky? He often stops with us," he began to say in his garrulous style, as he leaned on the balustrade of the steps. But just as he was in the midst of telling about his acquaintance with Sviazhsky, again the gate creaked on its hinges, and the workmen came in from the fields with their harrows and wooden ploughs. The horses attached to them were fat and in good condition. The laborers evidently belonged to the family. 2 were young fellows and wore colored cotton shirts and caps. The other 2 were hired men and wore shabby shirts. One was an old man, the other middle-aged. The old peasant, starting down from the porch, went to the horses and began to unharness them. "Where have you been ploughing?" "In the potato fields. We finished with one. You, Feodot, don't bring the gelding, but leave him at the trough. We'll harness another." "Say, Batyushka, shall I tell him to take out the ploughshares or bring 'em?" asked a big-framed, healthy-looking lad, evidently the old peasant's son. "Put 'em in the drags," replied the old man, coiling up the reins and throwing them to the ground. "Put things in order, then we'll have dinner." The handsome girl in galoshes came back to the house with her brimming pails swinging from her shoulders. The other women appeared from different quarters, some young and comely, others old and ugly. with children and without children. The samovar began to sing on the stove. The workmen and the men of the household, having taken out their horses, came in to dinner. Levin, sending for his provisions from the tarantass, begged the old peasant to take tea with him. "Well, I have already drunk my tea," said the old peasant, evidently flattered by the invitation. "However, for company's sake." At tea Levin learned the whole history of the old man's domestic economy. 10 years before he had rented of a lady 120 desiatins, and the year before had bought them, and he had rented 300 more of a neighbouring landowner. A small portion of this land, and that the poorest, he sublet, but 40 desiatins he himself worked with the help of his sons and 2 hired men. The old peasant complained that all was going bad, but Levin saw that he complained only for form's sake, and that his affairs were flourishing. If they had been bad he would not have bought land for 500 rubles, or married off his 3 sons and his nephew, or built twice after his izba was burned, and each time better. Notwithstanding the old peasant's complaints, it was evident that he felt pride in his prosperity, pride in his sons, in his nephew, his daughters, his horses, his cows, and especially in the fact that he owned all this domain. From his conversation with the old man, Levin learned that he believed in modern improvements. He planted many potatoes, and his potatoes, which Levin saw in the storehouse, he had already dug and brought in, while on Levin's estate they had only begun to dig them. He used the plug on the potato fields, as he called the plough which he got from the proprietor. He sowed wheat. The little detail that the old peasant sowed rye and fed his horses with it especially struck Levin. How many times Levin, seeing this beautiful fodder going to waste on his own estate, had wished to harvest it, but he found it impossible to accomplish it. The muzhik used it and could not find sufficient praise for it. "How do the women do it?" "Oh, they pile it up on one side, and then the cart comes for it." "But with us proprietors everything goes wrong with the hired men," said Levin, filling his teacup and offering it to him. "Thank you," replied the old man, taking the cup, but refusing the sugar, pointing to the lumps which lay in front of him. "How can you get along with hired men?" said he. "It is ruinous. Here's Sviatsky, for example. We know what splendid land, but they don't get decent crops, all from lack of care." "Yes, but how do you do with your workmen?" "It's all among ourselves. We watch everything. Lazybones, off they go. We work with our own hands." "Batyushka, Finnegan wants you to give him the tar water," said the woman in galoshes, looking in through the door. "So it is, sir," said the old man rising, and, having crossed himself many times before the icons or sacred pictures, he once more thanked Levin and left the room. When Levin went into the dark izba to give orders to his coachman, he found all the men folks sitting down to dinner. The peasant women were on their feet helping. The healthy-looking young son, with his mouth full of kasha gruel, got off some joke, and all broke into loud guffaws. And more hilariously than the others laughed the woman in galoshes, who was pouring shchi, or cabbage soup, into a cup. It might well be that jolly face of the woman in galoshes cooperated powerfully with the whole impression of orderliness which this peasant home produced on Levin, but the impression was so strong that Levin could never get rid of it, and all the way from the old man's to Sviatsky's, again and again he thought of what he had seen at the farmhouse as something deserving special attention. End of chapter 25. Part 3, Chapter 26, of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. Sviatsky was prédivoditelь, or marshal of the nobility in his district. He was 5 years older than Levin, and had been married some time. His sister-in-law was an intimate of his family, and to Levin she was a very attractive young lady, and Levin knew that Sviatsky and his wife would be very glad for him to marry her. He knew this infallibly, as marriageable young men usually know such things, and he knew also that though he dreamed of marriage, and was sure that this fascinating young lady would make a charming wife, he would sooner have been able to fly to heaven than to marry her, even if he had not been in love with Kitty Shtcherbatsky. And this knowledge poisoned his pleasure in his prospective visit. On receiving Sviazhsky's letter, with his invitation to go hunting, Levin had immediately thought about this, but in spite of it, decided that such views in regard to him on the part of Sviazhsky were entirely gratuitous, and he decided to accept the invitation. Moreover, he had in the depths of his soul a strong curiosity to see this girl once more and experiment on the effect that she would produce on him. Sviazhsky's domestic life was in the highest degree pleasant, and Sviazhsky himself was the very best type of the proprietor devoted to the affairs of the province, and this fact always interested Levin. He was one of those men that always excited Levin's amazement, whose opinions, very logical, although never self-formed, take one direction, while their lives, perfectly defined and content in their course, take another, absolutely independent of each other and almost always in opposition. Sviazhsky was a thoroughgoing liberal. He despised the nobility, charged the majority of the nobles with secretly, and from motives of cowardice, opposing emancipation, and he regarded Russia as a rotten country like Turkey, and its government so wretched that he did not permit himself seriously to criticize its acts. And yet he had accepted public office and attended faithfully to his duties. He never even went out without donning his official cap, with its red border and cockade. He declared that human existence was endurable only abroad, where he was going to live at the first opportunity, but at the same time he carried on in Russia a very complicated estate in the most perfect style, and was interested in all that was going on in Russia, and was fully up with the times. The Russian muzhik, in his eyes, stood between man and monkey, but, when the elections came, he gave his hand to the peasants by preference, and listened to them with the utmost attention. He believed neither in God nor in the devil, but he showed great concern in the questions concerning ameliorating the condition of the clergy and the diminution of the revenues, and moreover he labored with especial zeal to have his village church kept in repair. In regard to the complete emancipation of woman, and especially her right to work, he sided with the most extreme supporters of this doctrine, but he lived with his wife in such perfect harmony that though they had no children everyone admired them, and he took entire direction of the family affairs, so that his wife did nothing, and could do nothing, except in cooperation with him, in order to pass the time as agreeably as possible. If Levin had not been naturally disposed to see the best side of people, the analysis of Sviazhsky's character would have caused him no trouble or question. He would have said to himself, "Fool," or "good for nothing," and that would have been the end of it. But he could not say "fool," durak, because Sviazhsky was undoubtedly not only very clever, but also very cultivated and an extraordinarily simple-hearted man, entirely free from conceit. There was no subject which he did not know, but he displayed his knowledge only when it was needed. Still less could he say that he was a good-for-nothing, because Sviazhsky was unquestionably an honorable, excellent, sensible man, who was always doing his work cheerfully and alertly, and had apparently never intentionally done anything wrong or could do anything wrong. Levin tried to comprehend and could not understand him, and always looked at him and his life as a living enigma. He and Levin had been friends, and therefore Levin allowed himself to study Sviazhsky, and tried to trace his view of life to the very source. But this was always an idle task. Every time Levin made the effort to penetrate a little further into the hidden chambers of Sviazhsky's mind, he discovered that the man was somewhat confused. A sort of terror showed itself in his eyes, as if he feared that Levin was going to entrap him, and he would give him a good-natured and jolly rebuff. Now, after his disenchantment on the subject of farm management, Levin was especially glad to be at Sviazhsky's. To say nothing of the fact that he was always pleasantly impressed by the sight of these doves so contented with themselves and all they possessed, and their comfortable nest, he had a great longing, now that he was so dissatisfied with his own life, to discover the secret of his having such clear, decided, and cheerful views of life. Moreover, Levin knew that he should meet at Sviazhsky's the proprietors of the neighborhood, and he was especially desirous to talk with them, to hear about their experiences in farm management, about their crops, their way of hiring service, and the like, which, as Levin knew well, it was the fashion to regard as very trifling topics of conversation, but which seemed to him more important than anything else. Perhaps these things were not important during the days of serfdom, or in England. In both those cases conditions are definitely fixed. But with us at the present time, when everything has been overturned and the new order is only just begun, the question how to regulate these conditions is the only important one in Russia." Such was Levin's conviction. The hunting which Sviazhsky gave him was poorer than Levin had expected. The marshes were dry and the woodcock scarce. Levin walked all day and bagged only 3 birds. But in compensation he brought back with him as always from hunting a ravenous appetite, capital spirits, and the intellectual excitement which violent physical exercise always gave him. Even when he was out hunting, while, as it would seem, his thoughts were not busy about anything, he kept remembering the old man and his family, and the impression remained with him that there was some peculiar tie between himself and that family. In the evening, at the tea-table in the company of 2 proprietors who had come on some business with the marshal, the interesting conversation that he had looked forward to soon began. At the tea-table Levin sat next to the hostess and had to keep up a conversation with her and her sister who sat opposite him. His hostess was a moon-faced lady of medium stature and light complexion, all radiant with smiles and dimples. Levin endeavored, through her, to unravel the enigma which her husband's character offered him, but he could not get full control of his thoughts, because opposite to him sat the pretty sister-in-law, in a gown worn, as it seemed to him, for his especial benefit, with a square corsage cut rather low in front, giving a glimpse of a very white bosom. This décolleté gown, in spite of the fact that the bosom was very white, or perhaps from the reason that it was very white, stopped the free flow of his thought. He could not help imagining, though of course erroneously, that this display was made for his benefit, and yet he felt that he had no right to look at it, and he tried not to look at it, but he was conscious of being to blame for her wearing such a gown. It seemed to Levin that he was deceiving some one, that he ought to make some kind of an explanation, but that it was an utter impossibility to do it, and so he kept blushing and felt ill at ease, and his constraint communicated itself to the pretty young lady. But the hostess seemed not to notice it, and kept up a very lively conversation. "You say that my husband does not take an interest in Russian affairs?" she asked. "On the contrary, he was happy when he was abroad, but not so happy as he is here. Here he feels that he is in his sphere. He has so much to do, and he has the faculty of interesting himself in everything. Oh, you've not been to see our school, have you?" "Yes, I have. That little house covered with ivy." "Yes, it is Nastia's work," said she, glancing at her sister. "Do you yourself teach?" asked Levin, trying to look at Nastia's face, but feeling that, in spite of himself, he would see the low corsage. "Yes, I teach, and intend to keep on teaching. But we have an excellent schoolmistress, and we have gymnastics." "No, thank you. I will not take any more tea," said Levin. He felt he was committing a solecism, but he could not keep up the conversation, and he rose in confusion. "I am very much interested in what they are saying," he added, and went to the other end of the table, where the host was talking with the 2 landed proprietors. Sviazhsky was sitting with his side toward the table, twirling his cup around with one hand, and with the other stroking his long beard and lifting it up to his nose and dropping it again as if he were smelling it. His bright black eyes were fixed with a keen amusement on one of the proprietors, a man with a white moustache, who was complaining bitterly about the peasantry. Levin saw that Sviazhsky had an answer ready for the worthy gentleman's comical complaints, and could reduce his arguments to powder if his official position did not compel him to respect the proprietors. The proprietor with the white moustache was evidently a narrow-minded country gentleman, an inveterate opponent of the emancipation, and an old-style farmer. Levin could see the signs of it in his old-fashioned shiny coat, in his keen angry eyes, in his well-balanced Russian speech, in his authoritative, slow, and studied manner, and his imperious gestures with his large, handsome, sunburnt hands, on one of which for sole ornament was an old-fashioned wedding ring. End of chapter 26. Part 3, Chapter 27 of Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Nathan Haskell Doyle. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Marianne Spiegel. If only it weren't a pity to abandon what has been done. Costs so much labor. It would be better to give up, sell out, go abroad, and hear La Belle Helene, like Nikolai Ivanovitch, the old proprietor was saying, while his intelligent face lighted up with a pleasant smile. There now, but still you don't sell out, said Nikolai Ivanovitch Sviazhsky. So you must be well off on the whole. I am well off in one way, because I have a home of my own, with board and lodging. Besides, one always hopes that the peasantry will improve. But would you believe it? This drunkenness, this laziness, everything goes to destruction. No horses, no cows. They starve to death. But try to help them. Take them for farm hands. They manage to ruin you. Yes, even before a justice of the peace. But you, too, can complain to the justice of the peace, said Sviazhsky. What? I complain? Not for all the world. All such talk shows that complaints are idle. Here, at the mill, they took their handsel and went off. What did the justice of the peace do? Acquitted them. Your only chance is to go to the communal court, to the starshina. The starshina will have the man thrashed for you. He settles things in the old-fashioned way. If it were not for him, you had better sell out, fly to the ends of the world. The proprietor was evidently trying to tease Sviazhsky, but Sviazhsky not only did not lose his temper, but was much amused. Well, we carry on our estates without these measures, said he, smiling. I, and Levin, and he. He pointed to the other proprietor. Yes, but ask Mikhail Petrovitch how his affairs are getting along. Is that a rational way? Demanded the proprietor, especially accenting the word rational. My way is very simple, said Mikhail Petrovitch. Thank the Lord. My whole business lies in seeing that the money is ready for the autumn taxes. The muzhiks come and say, Batyushka, help us, father. Well, all these muzhiks are neighbors. I pity 'em. Well, I advance 'em the first third, only I say, remember, children, I help you, and you must help me when I need you, sowing the oats, getting in the hay, harvesting. Now I get along with them as with my own family. To be sure, there are some among them who haven't any conscience. Levin, who knew of old about these patriarchal traditions, exchanged glances with Sviazhsky, and interrupting Mikhail Petrovitch, he said, How would you advise, addressing the old proprietor with the grey moustache. How do you think one's estate ought to be managed? Well, manage it just as Mikhail Petrovitch does. Either give half the land to the muzhiks, or go shares with them. That is possible. But, all the same, the wealth of the country is growing less and less. Places on my lands, which in the old time of serfage, under good management, produced ninefold, now produce only threefold. Emancipation has ruined Russia. Sviazhsky looked at Levin with smiling eyes, and even made a scarcely noticeable gesture to express his disdain. But Levin did not find the old proprietor's words ridiculous. He understood them better than he understood Sviazhsky. Much that the old man said in his complaint, that Russia was ruined by the emancipation, seemed to him true. For him it was novel and unanswerable. The proprietor evidently expressed his honest thought, a thought which arose not from any desire to show an idle wit, but from the conditions of his life, which had been spent in the country where he could see the question practically from every side. The fact is, please to acknowledge, continued the old proprietor, who evidently wished to show that he was not an enemy of civilization. All progress is accomplished by force alone. Take the reforms of Peter, of Catherine, of Alexander. Take European history itself. Still more so for progress in agriculture. The potato, for instance. To introduce potatoes into Russia required force. We have not always ploughed with iron ploughs. Perhaps they have been introduced into our domains, but it required force. Now, until recently, when we had control over our serfs, we proprietors could conduct our affairs with all sorts of improvements, drawing rooms and winnowing machines and dung carts, all sorts of tools, we could introduce because we had the power, and the muzhiks at first would oppose and then would imitate us. But now, by the abrogation of serfage, they have taken away our authority, and so our estates, now that everything is reduced to the same level, must necessarily sink back to the condition of primitive barbarism. This is my view of it." "Yes, but why? If that were rational, then you could keep on with your improvements by aid of hired labour," said Sviazhsky. "We have no power. How could I, allow me to ask?" This is the working force, the chief element in the problem before us," thought Levin. "With hired men?" "Hired men will not work well, or work with good tools. Our labourers know how to do only one thing, to drink like pigs, and, when they are drunk, to ruin everything you entrust them with. They water your horses to death, destroy your best harnesses, take the tires off your wheels, and sell them to get drunk, and stick bolts into your winnowing machines so as to render them useless. Everything that is not done in their way is nauseous to them. And thus the affairs of our estates go from bad to worse. The lands are neglected and go to weeds, or else are abandoned to the muzhiks. Instead of producing millions of tchverts of wheat, you can raise only a few 100,000. The public wealth is diminishing. If they were going to free the serfs, they should have done it gradually." And he developed his own scheme of emancipation, whereby all these difficulties would have been avoided. This plan did not interest Levin, but when the gentleman had finished he returned to his first proposition, with the hope of inducing Sviazhsky to tell what he seriously thought about it. He said, addressing Sviazhsky, "It is very true that the level of our agriculture is growing lower and lower, and that in our present relations with the peasantry, it is impossible to carry on our estates rationally," he said. "I am not of that opinion," said Sviazhsky, seriously. "I only see that we are not up to the point of managing our estates, and that on the contrary, since serfage was abolished, agriculture has decayed. I argue that in those days it was very wretched and very low. We never had any machines, or good oxen, or decent supervision. We did not even know how to make up our accounts. Ask a proprietor. He could not tell you what a thing cost, or what it would bring him." "Italian bookkeeping," said the old proprietor, ironically. "Reckon all you please, and get things mixed as much as you please. There will be no profit in it." "Why get things mixed up? Your miserable flail, your Russian topchachek, will break all to pieces. My steam thresher will not break to pieces. Then your wretched nags, how are they? A puny breed that you can pull by the tails comes to nothing. But our Petcherons are vigorous horses. They are worth something. And so with everything. Our agriculture always needed to be helped forward." "Yes, but it would need some power, Nikolai Ivanovitch. Very well for you, but when one has one son at the university and several others at school, as I have, he can't afford to buy Percherons." "There are banks on purpose." "To have my last goods and chattels sold under the hammer. No, thank you." "I don't agree that it is necessary or possible to lift the level of agriculture much higher," said Levin. "I am much interested in this question, and I have the means, but I cannot do anything. As for banks, I don't know whom they profit. Up to the present time, whatever I have spent on my estate has resulted only in loss. Cattle, loss. Machines, loss." "That is true," said the old proprietor with the grey moustache, laughing with hearty satisfaction. "And I am not the only man," continued Levin. "I call to mind all those who have made experiments in the rational manner. All, with few exceptions, have come out of it with losses. Will you admit that your farming is profitable?" he asked, and at that instant he detected in Sviazhsky's face that transient expression of embarrassment which he noticed when he wanted to penetrate further into the inner chambers of Sviazhsky's mind. However, the question was not entirely fair play on Levin's part. His hostess had told him at tea that they had just had a German expert up from Moscow, who, for 500 rubles fee, agreed to put the bookkeeping of the estate in order, and he found that there had been a net loss of more than 3,000 rubles. She could not remember exactly how much, but the German accountant had calculated it to within 40 kopecks. The old proprietor smiled when he heard Levin's question about the profits of Sviazhsky's management. It was evident that he knew about the state of his neighbor's finances. "Maybe it is unprofitable," replied Sviazhsky, This only proves that either I'm a poor manager, or I sink my capital to increase the revenue." "Oh, revenue!" cried Levin with horror. "Maybe there is such a thing as revenue in Europe, where the land is better for the labor spent on it. But with us, the more labor spent on it, the worse it is. That is because it exhausts it. So there is no revenue." "How, no revenue? It is a law." "Then we are no exceptions to the law. The word renta, revenue, has no clearness for us, and explains nothing, but rather confuses. No, tell me how the doctrine of revenue can be—" "Won't you come have some curds? Masha, send us some curds or some raspberries," said Sviazhsky to his wife. "Raspberries have lasted unusually late this year." And with his usual jovial disposition of soul, Sviazhsky got up and went out, evidently assuming that the discussion was ended, while for Levin it seemed that it had only just begun. Levin was now left with the old proprietor, and continued to talk with him, endeavoring to prove to him that all the trouble arose from the fact that we did not try to understand our laborers' habits and peculiarities. But the old proprietor, like all people accustomed to think alone and for himself, found it difficult to enter into the thought of another, and clung firmly to his own opinions. He declared that the Russian muzhik was a pig and loved swinishness, and that it needed force or else a stick to drive him out of his swinishness. But we are such liberals that we have suddenly swapped off the 1,000-year-old stick for these lawyers and jails, where the good-for-nothing, stinking muzhik gets fed on good soup and has his pure air by the cubic foot. "Why," asked Levin, wishing to get back to the question, "do you think that it is impossible to reach an equilibrium which will utilize the forces of the laborer and render them productive?" "That will never come about with the Russian people. There is no force," replied the proprietor. "Why, could not new conditions be found?" asked Sviazhsky, who had been eating his curds and smoking a cigarette, and now approached the two disputants. "All the needful forms are ready for use, and well learned. That relic of barbarism, the primitive commune where each member is responsible for all, is falling to pieces of its own weight. The right of holding serfs has been abolished. Now there remains only free labor, and its forms are at hand, the day laborer, the journeyman, the ordinary farmer. And you can't get rid of this." "But Europe is discontented with these forms." "Yes, and perhaps discontent will find new ones, and will progress probably." "This is all I say about that," said Levin. "Why should we not seek for them on our side?" "Because it would be much the same as our pretending to invent new methods of constructing railways. Our methods are all ready. All we have to do is to apply them." "But if they do not suit us? If they are hurtful?" Levin insisted. And again he saw the frightened look in Sviazhsky's eyes. "Well, this. We throw up our caps, we follow wherever Europe leads. All this I know, but tell me, are you acquainted with all that is going on in Europe about the organization of labor?" "No, I know very little." "This question is now occupying the best minds in Europe. Schultz Delitz and his school, then all this prodigious literature on the labor question, the tendencies of Lassalle, the most radical of all of them, the Mühlhausen organization, this all is a fact, you surely must know." "I have an idea of it, but it's very vague." "No, you only say so. You know all this as well as I do. I don't set up to be a professor of social science, but these things interest me. And I assure you, if they interest you, you should go into them." "But where do they lead you?" "Beg pardon?" The two proprietors got up, and Sviazhsky, again arresting Levin in his disagreeable habit of looking into the inner chambers of his mind, went out to bid his guests good bye. CHAPTER 28